Hey, welcome YouTube to Gas Masks and Hand Grenades. I'm your host, Metal Man, is Jeff, and today I'm joined by one of the absolute OG progenitors of the subgenre of funeral doom metal. Yes, there were Finnish bands like Thurgathan and Skepticism, and of course, Australia's Disembowlment. And in the US, you had Evoken, all very important bands in the developing new sound that eventually was dubbed Funeral Doom. However, to my ears, it was the United Kingdom's Esoteric who delivered their first demo, Esoteric Emotions, The Death of Ignorance, in July of 1993, that blended crushingly heavy doom riffs in the My Dying Bride Paradise Lost vein with psychedelic guttural growls and screams swamped in reverb, delay, and compression, often rendering the lyrics all but indecipherable and simply part of the musical tapestry which set them apart from the other competitors in the infancy of this genre. He is a co-founder of the band Esoteric, birthed in Birmingham, the second largest city in the United Kingdom, in 1992, and originally was primarily the vocalist, effects specialist, and collaborator on songwriter. He eventually began playing guitar live as well and has maintained that role since 1999. And he is the only remaining member of the original incarnation of the band. So, of course, I am talking about the one, the only, Greg Chandler. How you doing, man?
Hi, yeah, good. Thanks. How are you?
Good. We're gonna pretend we didn't talk for 20 minutes before we started
Okay,
this
cool.
stream, right? So first of all, I want to thank you, Greg, for being here today.
No, thank you.
This kind of came together rather quickly, and I appreciate that because I do have a health issue that I'm dealing with. That time is kind of the essence. But I reached out to you on Instagram, which was super cool, and you got back to me after a day or two. And you're probably like, "Who is this loon? And why does he want to talk about my band like this so badly?" But yeah, we've been back and forth a little bit, and you are the only person this far, though, that I've actually previewed the questions to prior to the interview, and I understand why, because you got a busy schedule and you wanted to
Yeah.
kind of get a feel for what was going on, which is super cool. So, how are your holidays? And like we'll get all that stuff out of the way. Busy time for you?
Yeah. Generally, I was working over a lot of the Christmas break and the New Year, and then I took some days off at the start of January after the holidays, really. So,
Now, do
yeah.
you have kids or anything like that, or
No, I don't have kids now.
no kids? Okay, so you didn't have to do all that kind of craziness.
No, I don't have to do the normal traditions.
Normal traditional stuff, yeah. Well, I mean, I don't either. My kids are in their late 20s now, so it's
Cool.
long behind me, but they're super cool. And my one kid's a big Esoteric fan, which is kind of neat too.
Oh, cool.
But so yeah, I like to kind of the way I like to do these things, as you've seen now with you got a sneak preview. I like to do these things kind of chronologically, and the way we're going to actually start is we're going to jump back to when Greg was a wee lad in the Birmingham. Are you from the? Is it from the Midlands? Now, clear me up on something. You're talking to a dumb American here, okay? Is the Midlands like the section of the UK that they're talking about, or is it a place literally?
It's it's kind of like a section of the UK. It's just basically the middle section between the north and the south.
Okay. So, and London being in the south, right?
Yeah.
And then Birmingham is kind of the second largest city in the middle of the Midlands. And what's up top then? I guess you're heading up towards Scotland and Ireland.
Yeah, basically above Birmingham, you've got major cities like Manchester, Leeds, and then you've got like further up, you've got Yorkshire, Lancashire, and then you're Northumberland, and then you're into Scotland. Really,
you're into Scotland, yeah. All right. Well, I just learned something there. That'll show you. I kind of figured it out, but I'm like, when they say Midlands, does that mean like the middle of the country, or is it an actual place? So, so yeah, tell me about your first like remembrances of music, like when music first hit you and affected you in a specific way.
I guess my earliest memories of music probably just from what I've been hearing, what I was hearing in from my parents or from being out and about, because music's obviously played everywhere, shops, stores, wherever you go. Basically, there's music playing, and I guess probably the first bands that I was exposed to would have been kind of like rock, bit of disco, bit of pop, stuff like that. Like my folks were kind of into stuff like the Beatles, Rolling Stones, and then ABBA, stuff like that. Elton John, all music of their era, basically. So
Right.
I guess those are the first bands that I was kind of exposed to mostly, I guess.
So you were born like the mid 70s, somewhere in that time?
Yeah, I was born in 73, towards the end of 73. So
Okay, so you're not really cognizant of music until the end of the 70s era is when you kind of
yeah,
hearing that AOR stuff and that early Elton John, that mid period Elton John, which is great music, by the way.
mm-hmm.
So what do you have any specific memories of artists or bands that kind of, memorable events? And I say this because I say this in every stream, is that, for me, I'm a few years older than you. I was born in 66.
Yeah.
So my first memories are right around the turn of the 60s into the 70s. And I remember like Simon and Garfunkel, Bridge Over Troubled Water. And I remember,
them as well.
Yeah, Carole King, Tapestry. And oddly enough, one of the things, my dad was always a classical dude. Yeah. My mom was kind of the AOR rock person, but she wasn't listening to like Zeppelin or Sabbath. She was listening to the more easier listening stuff, the radio AOR stuff. But one of the things I really remember is Beethoven's Fifth Symphony, that dun 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 dun, like that stayed with me, and I remember it very specifically. Do you have any of those kind of memories as a kid that, things like I was with mom and we were going on this trip somewhere? And
I don't really have memories of music that are tied to specific events in life as such, but I guess the kind of first kind of artists and bands that I was getting into of my own kind of accord as a young child would have been stuff like early Michael Jackson, Jackson 5, and stuff like the 80s, early 80s music as well, like Aha. Frankie Goes to Hollywood, Eurythmics, stuff like this.
Duran.
Yeah, that kind of like 80s new romantic, Adam and the Ants, stuff like this as well.
Sure. How about Japan? Do you remember Japan?
Yeah, I remember Japan. Yeah.
Yeah, Richard. Obviously, we talked. Those guys are friends of mine, and it's like I never knew that was him until much later. Obviously,
cool.
It was like, man, I remember that. I forget which song it was, Ghost probably or something like that. As a teen, I would have been, when you were getting into that stuff as a young kid, I'd have been already in like high school and stuff. So it was kind of cool because while I don't really remember, like, I remember Zeppelin clearly, and I clearly remember the first time I heard Eddie Van Halen. That was like game changer of game changers. Like, what the fuck was that, man? Like, I was 78, and a dude was working on his like hang glider out. If it was friends with my parents, and I'm riding my bike around, I just hear Eruption go into You Really Got Me. I'm like, that's what I want to be, man. That's what I want to do. Didn't work out for me exactly, but it's those milestones, then Hendrix and all that kind of stuff like that. And it's cool. I just like to ask that because it's kind of cool to see what the markers are. And like you mentioned Michael Jackson, and man, just some amazing music came out of that dude. Like, if you're a lover of music, you can't not appreciate what an artist he was,
Yeah, of course. Yeah. I think, for me, when I was very young, I didn't really get into rock or metal until I was kind of like a little bit older, like I guess around 12, 13, started to listen to rock and stuff like In Excess or Alice Cooper, for example.
Oh yeah.
And then from there, just kind of went into stuff like Iron Maiden, Judas Priest, Motorhead, and once I started to get more of a taste for the heavier stuff, I kind of like had more of a kind of impetus really to go heavier and heavier and just to see what else was out there. So
that's kind of what happens with all of us that are metalheads, right? We start here and then we suddenly go, oh, that's really heavy. I like that. Oh, that's heavier. I like that even more, So, in keeping with that theme, there, what did you first play the guitar or the piano, or like what was your first instrument that you started on?
First instrument was guitar. I didn't really. I started playing guitar at the age of 10,
Oh
but
wow. Okay.
I only played it for like a year or so, and then stopped because when I moved from like a junior school to kind of senior school, the guitar lessons kind of stopped, and I kind of put it down, and didn't pick it up again till a few years later when I was about 15. Picked the guitar up again and got an electric guitar, and then started, doing it a bit more seriously.
Right.
But piano, I wouldn't say I play piano really. I basically learned how to. I started learning to play the piano, but I didn't really. I was already a guitarist at this point, and I did it more as a way to write music rather than to become a piano player. So
Right.
I'm not a good piano player. I'm not a
You're
good.
just a you're
I
a,
just
a
know
chord
I can just.
guy and coming up with cool sounds, right?
Yeah. I can
Yeah.
just play chords and
That's
melodies
me.
and write music on the instrument rather than be
Yeah.
a proficient player.
That's me too, as well. So I just, I tried the piano lessons thing. I hated my piano teacher. It was like, nah, I'm not doing that. And then I had a guitar at 8, but what I would do is, big Kiss fanatic. Kiss was like the game changer for me as far as hard rock and going heavier.
Yeah.
And that would be what most 70s kids my age would be getting into.
Mhm.
We lived in Texas, and they all have flat rancher houses down there. You don't have double, rarely back in the 70s you didn't have like double floored houses, so I
Mhm.
would put my stereo speakers we lived in a cul-de-sac, like the end of the road where the rounded thing was, and
Yeah.
and I happened to live with a lot of young girls around me, so
Mhm.
I'm like 12 or in that range, maybe 11, 12, and of course I'm learning, hey, get up on the roof, man, and pretend you're Paul Stanley and the girls will flock. And that was about all that happened. Nothing else happened, but it was cool to have that adulation. And until my mom found out from the neighbor lady, you know what your son's doing? He's climbing around on the roof with his acoustic guitar, not an electric, by the way, acoustic. And yeah, that didn't last very long. Then I was locked in my room after classes and stuff like that.
Mhm.
Did you? So you weren't classically trained on piano, obviously.
Nah.
When did you realize you wanted to be a musician? Because you started Esoteric quite young, I believe, right?
Yeah. Basically, as soon as I got proficient enough on guitar to be able to write music, really, wanted to do something with a band, and we were all like between about 17 and 19 when we started Esoteric. So
Mhm.
we were still very young, still very inexperienced and naive, and not particularly good musicians at that stage. So that takes time.
Sure, sure, of course.
Yeah.
Did what was your parental support like at this point in time? I mean, you had an electric guitar, so
Yeah.
I didn't even get an electric until I was actually out of the house. My mom was like,
Uh-huh.
I'm not having that noise in here, that kind of stuff. What
Yeah.
what was the story there? Were they pretty supportive?
Um, they were kind of, I suppose, but they weren't too keen on the kind of music we were doing, obviously.
Yeah. Right, right.
Because that's not the kind of music that your parents are going to be proud of. So uh,
What okay, so what were you listening to at that point in time then? Are you getting into
I
like
was listening to metal. Well, yeah, I was listening to rock and metal when I started playing about 15 or so. I would have been listening to not so much on. I think the heaviest I started to get into death metal about 16. Where I first discovered Death, Scream
Ooh,
Bloody Gore LP
oh
in my
yeah.
local record store, and I bought it just because it looked heavy, and I was at that point I was just trying to get into. I was listening to Slayer and stuff, and I was just trying to find stuff that was even heavier. And this was, I mean, death metal was still very new back
Oh
then.
yeah, 87, yeah.
So,
Possessed
yeah,
and you had Possessed and you had Death kind of pretty much,
yeah,
Was
and
were you clearly at that point when you're playing guitar in your 14, 15, 16 range, you're getting into Priest and Maiden and all the new
yeah,
albums, stuff like that, and Venom, I would assume?
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I liked Venom as well. Um,
Fate, Merciful Fate.
Yeah. I mean, I would say I was more into like Slayer and Megadeth and stuff like that than Merciful Fate kind of vibe. But I listened to everything basically, so I didn't really, you know, I was interested in all kinds of metal, not just certain genres.
Right. So it was an all-encompassing love affair for you, basically.
Yeah, basically. I mean, even now, I mean, there's not any particular genre of metal that I wouldn't give some time to, you know.
Yeah,
Or I
you
wouldn't like
sound a
to
lot
back.
like me. I mean, I don't know if you can see that behind me right there. That's
Yeah.
about 120 CDs that I have lined up for deep dives and things that are coming up. And there's stuff from, as varied as Tangerine Dream to,
Hmm.
Aldo Nova to Dead Can Dance. I mean, like
Yeah,
I'm into
I like those as well.
everything, man. Yeah, everything. So
Hmm.
Tangerine Dream, and then I've got Autopsy that I'm doing, a deep dive on. So it's
Yeah.
like,
Autopsy
my
were one of
mom
my
still,
favorites back then.
my mom still says to me, like, you're 57 years old. When are you gonna grow up? I'm like, never, mom. Like, never. Of course, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Hey, I did want to make one quick mention here, and then we'll carry on. This guy right here, the Dreadful Minutes, is my buddy Rick, who might join us right towards the end of things. So
Cool.
keep watching, Rick. When we get to the part where I mention jumping into Greg's production, what's the word I'm looking for here? Career. Then maybe we'll have you jump in, and you have to be quiet though. You can't fanboy too much. So, all right. But yeah, these guys are all. Well, we got 8 people in here, which is super cool for this time
Cool.
of the day. So, any guitarists that were really that stick out in your mind as like Dave Murray or the guys in Priest or KK or what? Anybody that really was like, man, that's the guy I want to emulate. That's the guy I want to be.
Not specific guitarists as such. I was more into like bands as a whole rather than focusing more on one instrument or one person. I was never really one that would pick up the guitar and learn how to play other people's songs. I was more just kind of into the bands for what they did and for what they would do. But I was conscious really not to try and pick up too much from other people's ways of playing, so that I could try and develop my own kind of style a bit more. Really,
That's a
but
good
yeah,
way. I mean, I kind of was like that too, but Rush was huge in my.
Yeah,
it was huge for me. So Alex was the guy. I mean, I
mm-hmm.
still revere him like you wouldn't believe. I got to meet him in 2007. It was one of those
Cool.
moments where I was like, he's just, I'm like, I'm not worthy. I'm not worthy. He's like, he's just super cool guy. And, you do realize that when you get out and you meet a bunch of musicians, they're just like the rest of us. You're just like me. We have so much in common
Mm-hmm.
as humans that because of the things that we enjoy about life and particularly from metal or rock or the musical sphere, they're just dudes, they just have bigger bank accounts than I do. That's all, that's the thing, right?
Yeah.
How about what was the first album you bought with your own money?
Oh, I wouldn't remember, to be honest. I was quite young.
Okay.
It would have
Do you
been
remember the first one you might have gotten as a gift? Christmas gift, or
I can't really remember that far back. I think the first album was probably something like probably the first band that I bought in my money. It's probably something like Michael Jackson. Back then, it would have been just like I had a little Ghetto Blaster cassette thing.
Yeah.
When I was younger, but I didn't really have my own stereo until I was a bit older.
Yeah, brothers and sisters, or
yeah, I have 2 sisters, one older and one who's quite a bit younger. So
okay.
I did have some common interests, like in terms of music, with my older sister.
Yeah, I was going to say, did she inform your taste at all that you remember, or
not too much, because she wasn't into metal, but she was into alternative music, like and I did pick up some bands from the stuff that she liked and listened to, like the Stranglers, Psychedelic Furs.
Oh.
And then stuff like I got into slightly heavier kind of alternative stuff like Sonic Youth and Fugazi, Mudhoney, stuff like this as well.
More punky elements.
Yeah.
So, were you into like the goth scene, like Sisters of Mercy and Fields of Nephilim and stuff like you were? Okay. Because I hear that influence to a degree in Esoteric's music. And that's the thing with Esoteric, and you'll find if you read some of my stuff where I have the parentheses, those are my thoughts that I'm going to posit to the people that are watching. You'll see that my experience as a music listener brings a lot into focus as far as what I'm hearing, but I never really know if that's really what the artist intends unless I bring that out and I ask them, you know what I mean? But like Sisters and Mission UK and all those the Chameleons, so much great goth, new wave, whatever you want to call it, you know, it's just was great fucking music, you know. So how about your first concert?
First concert was probably Wolfsbane, I think. I don't know if you know Wolfsbane. Blaze Bailey, he sang for Iron Maiden later. Yeah, because they're a quite local band there in Tamworth, which is just across from Birmingham, basically.
Okay.
And they were doing quite a lot of shows in Birmingham back then, so I think they were probably the first concert, and then Judas Priest, Motorhead, stuff like that.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
What tour did you see Priest for the first time? Do you remember?
I think the first time I saw Priest was probably Painkiller tour.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. And stuff like Annihilator as well. I think Annihilator were playing with Priest or Motorhead. I can't remember who it was, but and then pretty soon after that, some of the death metal stuff started coming across, like Morbid Angel, and obviously seeing local bands like Bolt Thrower and Carcass were playing as well.
And you were seeing them in clubs, like
because the scene was very small then.
Right.
Yeah.
Wow, man, Carcass, one of my favorites, and just watching Bill Steer, man, the dude, what a riff god, And Bolt Thrower, now that's one that unfortunately I missed, and you know, it's weird for me, I because I'm a little bit older, I didn't really get in. I had the glam metal thing was the big thing, because I'm in high school during when Rat and Crew and Striper and all those bands are like that's their heyday, that 4, 5, 6 year period.
Yeah.
So I didn't really get into death metal until Steven Wilson, as I told you, got me into Opeth. And it was funny because I was listening to a lot of industrial around then too, like Skinny Puppy, Frontline Assembly, which I love those two bands. And I turned him on to Frontline, and he said, "You got to check this band Opeth out." I'm like, dude, man, those death metal vocals so stupid, man. I'm like, that's just so dumb. He's like, what the hell? You just sent me a bunch of Frontline Assembly, and all you hear is, it's like, what's the difference? I'm like, oh, you do have a point there. You're right. And then it clicked, man. And then it was like I was off to the races and grabbing fucking Bergtot and, you know, Over and everything I could get my hands on. But I kind of missed, like, Death is still my biggest miss in terms of not being able to see them live. I've seen most of the others. Bolt Thrower never made it over here while I was aware of them. So you're lucky, man. I mean, that's cool. You got to see a lot of really kick-ass shit, you know?
Yeah, well, Bolt Thrower are actually from Birmingham as well. Same as Napalm Death. So, and they were playing quite regularly back in the early 90s.
So you know those guys, I would assume, right?
I know Carl a bit from Bolt Thrower. I don't know the guys in Napalm so well. I mean, I've met them briefly, but I wouldn't say that like I particularly know them.
Okay, so you're not all like hanging out then?
No.
Well, that's what I wanted to ask you. Actually, that was the question the first real off script question I wanted to ask. You're 17, 18, 19 now, and you're developing. We're about ready to get into, you know. Was Esoteric your first real band, or do you have a bunch of false starts? And the reason what I want to sneak in there on that question, which you already had, is what was the scene like that you're coming into as a young 18, 17-year-old guitarist? You're trying to form this band. What's the scene like? And that kind of goes back to the Carcass, you know, Bolt Throwers sort of stuff.
Yeah. I mean, the scene was still very new. It was very fresh. All of the bands. I mean, it was like literally you'd discover a new band every few weeks or every couple of weeks. There were no. I mean, obviously, it was before the time of the internet, so the only way you'd really hear about these bands, there were no real successful major magazines. There were a few that started up, but then disappeared within a couple of issues. I think Terrorizer was the first one that had any kind of longevity to it, in the UK at least. And so you'd find out about bands mainly from tape trading, from underground fanzines. So you'd always be a few months or a year or more behind what was actually happening,
right?
Because the news, by the time you got it, the news was old.
Yeah. I'm glad you mentioned that, because that comes up from time to time, and that's a very real sort of thing. Like, I remember getting the metal mags and seeing the I guess they call them like the personals or whatever it was, where you would tape trade, but I never did it. And I think I was just in a weird way a little too old. Like, I was like, oh, that's not appealing. Why would I want to write to some dude in Europe and send him $6 and hope he sends me the cassette or whatever? And why, you know what I mean? It was just one of those weird mindsets that I was in at that point in time, and I never did it. And man, boy, do I regret that shit now, because those tapes are, I mean, like, I'm sitting on a small gold mine with some of those tapes, right?
Yeah. Well, unfortunately, you don't always keep everything from when you're young.
Yeah, it's true. It's true.
Yeah, sometimes you go through hard times in life and end up selling stuff and then regret it later on.
Been there, done that. I don't know how many CDs I've sold and gone, where's that CD at? And then I'm like, oh shit, I sold it. Well, now I'm going to buy it again for the third time, that kind of thing. But so the scene is developing at that point in time. And are you going out to metal clubs, or metal?
Yeah.
Is it metal nights, or is it metal clubs in your local area? Or
back in the early 90s, it was metal clubs. There was basically one club that was putting on most of the shows, and then later there would be some other places as well. I mean, there wasn't just one club; there were also pubs. But for like touring bands from abroad, the States or Europe, you'd go to like Edwards Number 8, and you go and see bands like Entombed there, or even Morbid Angel, Dismember. All of the classic, what are now that we know as the classics.
Right.
Those bands were touring, and you could go to a gig most weeks, to be honest, in Birmingham, which is very different to how it is now.
I bet.
Because
even here, I mean, although with the pandemic, it changed a lot, because now it seems like there's literally gigs every freaking day. You could right now go out and see someone, but the death metal stuff's a little bit different. They have to package a lot of bands together to just make tours work these days. So, so tell me a little bit about how, did you have any like pre-esoteric bands that are of note that you want?
No, Esoteric was basically the first band. What actually happened was myself and Brian, the other original member, we met through this other guitar. I can't even remember how we met, but we met through another guitarist, a guy called Richard, and we basically started jamming as a 3-piece, doing like Black Death stuff under a different band name. And after a few weeks and rehearsals, trying to get a drummer and stuff like this, auditioning people, myself and Brian didn't really like the direction that the guy was going in songwriting wise. So we decided we wanted to go off on our own, just the two of us, and build a band up from scratch, really do something different, something a lot slower and heavier, and something more along the lines of what we wanted to do, and create something a bit different rather than something that was generic or a reaction to what was going on in the scene.
Okay. And so this, do you ever mention the name of that band, or?
Yeah, it's called the Mazarek, basically. And
what was it called?
Sorry?
What was it called again?
A Mazarek.
A Mazarak. Okay, what's that?
I don't even remember, to be honest. It was what the other member. It was his band name. So
sounds like a Cthulhu type thing or something like
yeah.
that. So was my question, as you saw, was the artistic direction aesthetic for Esoteric immediately evident, or did it slowly morph into what it became? Sounds like it was sort of slowly morphing, but you had a vision for what you wanted to do,
Yeah.
and therein comes in the, we get into the those bands, and I'm going to mention them not because I want it to be any kind of a competition or who was first or anything, but there's Thurgoth, there's Skepticism, there's Disembowlment, there's Evoken. Were you aware of any of those bands? Because you guys all kind of hit the scene almost all in the same 18-month period.
Yeah. No, we weren't aware of any of those bands when we started, because we only discovered bands like Thurgoth and Skepticism and so on, Unholy were another, once we'd done the demo and actually started appearing in fanzines, and then we'd see their bands in the same fanzines. And then, so I used to write to Yarko in Unholy. I used to write to Nick with Evoken, and Damon from Mournful Congregation.
Okay.
So we basically got to know each other through, and we started tape trading ourselves as well by appearing in fanzines. So the bands that we were more, when we first started, we were more kind of directly influenced by the really extreme, slow death metal, like certain parts of Autopsy, or where it's quite aggressive and quite tortured but doomy as well. And maybe stuff like probably the only real kind of slow death doom band we'd heard before we started would be Winter.
And they were from New York.
Yeah. They were a bit more kind of Celtic Frost influence, I guess, but that was probably the kind of slowest, heaviest stuff we heard before we started. And maybe a Cathedral as well, we'd have just about heard those. But because I think influences come from a longer period of time, I think more slow, we were influenced by death metal, I would say.
Yeah, and I mean, you mentioned Celtic Frost. Certainly there's some Into the Pandemonium vibes in early Esoteric, in that not just the weirdness, if you will. That's the strange, almost hypnotic, sort of like hallucinatory vibes of what what they tried to do a little bit with Into the Pandemonium. I think would be probably something that you could kind of point to a little bit. But now that you mentioned Winter, that's one I forgot to put on the list, and they were very Autopsy influence as well too. I mean, that early Autopsy is just some evil fucking shit, man.
I think the psychedelic influence from us comes more from the types of bands that we also listen to, like Pink Floyd, King Crimson. We're listening to ambient music as well, and dark ambient. I mean, we were kind of pretty broad-minded even when we were quite young. We weren't just listening to metal, we were listening to all kinds of stuff, really.
All right, I'm going to ask you a question, another off-script question. If you had to, and you seem to be pretty into dark ambient, or you seem to at least have a pretty good understanding of that genre. If you had to pick the very first dark ambient album, what would you pick?
Very first one that existed,
like the godfather of dark ambient.
I don't know. I don't think I know that far back, but probably the very first kind of dark ambient band I would have heard would have been maybe Raison d'Etre.
Great band,
from the Cold Meat industry, really.
Oh, that shit!
That kind of exploded.
So many killer bands on their roster. Here's what I think. Honestly, here's exactly where I think the impetus for dark ambient came from. Tangerine Dream, Zeit.
Yeah, I like Tangerine Dream as well.
Zeit is, Zeit?
Yeah.
That's the dark ambient album. That's the OG Godfather, in my opinion.
Even a little bit Dead Can Dance as well.
Oh,
the early man. Dead Can Dance, yeah.
What's your favorite Dead Can Dance album?
Realms of the Dying Sun, I would say.
Attaboy. I was hoping you were going to say that because that's exactly what I was thinking right there. This album, for people that are watching, if you don't know it, you absolutely should. We're going to be doing a deep dive on them. Maybe I'll get Greg to come on with me and do a deep dive with that. We'll have to talk about that. But all right, so moving on here. So I made a joke here. Was Esoteric's mission out of the gate, so to speak, to become a funeral death doom band? Or was there early material and rehearsal tapes of you guys doing grunge tunes? I'm guessing there aren't any of those, right?
No, not really. We did do like a Spaceman 3 cover. I don't know if you know the band Spaceman 3.
Texas band,
we did do a cover of Suicide in rehearsal just for like our own amusement, but we never really did. We also did a cover of Dead by Autopsy, but we never played those live or had any intentions to go any further.
That's
it's
cool,
just our own fun.
So no Smells Like Teen Spirit demos out there? And okay, all right.
We're probably a bit, yeah. It was that era, actually, yeah, early 90s.
Well, yeah, it would have been, right? Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I liked Soundgarden and stuff like that.
Soundgarden's great fucking
Punch Tunnel as well, heavier, but from that kind of era.
Yeah, we talked. I mean, you saw I mentioned Thurgotham, Funeral, Skepticism, Disembowlment, Evoken, Morpho Congregation, Eternus. I mean, were you guys all aware once you started talking to each other via tape trading and stuff? Were you guys all aware that you guys were kind of creating this new subgenre at all?
Not really. Back when we started, I mean, maybe to a degree, we realized that we were among the first kind of really extreme kind of doom bands. But when we first started, we were kind of doom metal was more considered traditional with the melodic sung vocals and stuff, stuff like Trouble, St. Vitus, Candlemas, Solitude Eternus.
Right.
So we were more like outcasts of the scene, really, because we weren't really considered doom metal. We were considered death doom or extreme doom, but we weren't considered doom metal, I don't think. And the term funeral doom is something that appeared many years later. That was never used at the time. That's something that's kind of been
grandfathered into
retrospectively.
Yeah, it's grandfathered into it. Yeah, I'm aware of that. But so you guys are talking, and you're like, you're just doing what you're doing, and it's like, that shit's cool. Your shit's cool. Let's trade. And there was never any sort of grand plan that, guys, we're going to revolutionize metal or anything, right?
No, I mean, our feedback, our quite early feedback, I would say, was not wholly positive, so we say. So,
do you remember any of the early reviews for like the demo?
Yeah, sure, yeah. I mean, not just reviews, but also live, because if we played live, when we played live back in the early 90s, generally it was with other death metal bands or with black metal.
Right.
And because we were doing something so much slower at a time where everyone else was trying to outspeed each other.
Right.
It was kind of not always well received.
I can imagine. I can imagine. So you were opening for these bands and they're just pissing all over you, raining piss on you, right? More or less.
Well, you'd get the odd bit of abusive comments from the crowd or whatever. Some people shouting too slow. There were a few that appreciated it, but it took a bit of time for people to warm to the kind of speed and extremity of the music, I think.
All right. Another off-script question here. When you had a heckler, did you just say fuck off? Or did you ever say fuck off from the front of the stage?
Nah.
You seem like a proper English gentleman, so that probably was not in your retinue. But
well, I'm more like of the opinion that, in terms of if you do something creative, some people are not going to like it. Some people are going to criticize it, and people can be quite harsh. But at the end of the day, it's their opinion, and they're welcome to. So
exactly,
you can't please everyone.
Let's see here. Here's another one. We're going to get in the demo and the albums then. And just to mention, which I didn't say at the outset of this, Greg has graciously offered to come back for a part 2 because we got into this and it's pretty deep. And we just felt like I didn't want to keep him up until 2 a.m. his time, and 1 and 2. I didn't get all the listening in that I wanted to get in because my health has been a little wonky the last day or so. So we're going to do a part 2, and we might do it rather quickly, right?
Yeah.
You said you might be available Thursday night?
Yeah, Thursday night should be okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we'll finish up. We're going to go through Metamorphogenesis, and then we're going to do a little bit about his career in recording, which ties in a lot with album number 2, I believe, if I'm not incorrect.
Yeah.
And then we're going to call it and get him off to bed because it is, 10 o'clock his time over there almost. And then we'll do part 2 probably on Thursday night unless something comes up weird. So I want to thank you for being willing to do that, Craig.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you.
I have to ask, man. You saw the question, so you know it's coming.
Yeah.
Was typo negative at all an early influence? Because it's kind of there. There's some semblance of it there. But you're going to tell me no, I have the feeling. But I just hear it. And maybe I'm hearing something. And where I'm hearing it is more in the slow, gothier bits. Because you do have, Esoteric has gothy feels to it at times a lot. There's the
a little,
yeah, and I don't mean goth like the makeup and all that stuff. I mean more like the movement of the music and the heaviness, the emotional weight of the music, and just the ambient prettiness that sometimes winds its way all through the stuff. Was that at all an influence, and were you listening to them at all?
We did listen to Typo Negative. I would say probably if there was a goth influence, it was probably more from stuff like Sisters of Mercy,
right,
or Fields of Nephilim than from Typo Negative, because Typo Negative we've discovered them not that long before we started playing, really.
Right. Plus, there's a whole lot of tongue in cheek silliness with those guys, in a lot of ways. A lot of snarkiness with Peter Steele, and you guys don't do the snark thing much that I can
No, not really.
So, but I do hear it, and more just the overall atmospheric type thing, than anything else. So,
I mean, it's a band we did like, most of us liked it, at least back in the early 90s. Yeah. So maybe there's a slight subconscious influence. I don't know.
Sure. And I mean, let's be honest, as a musician myself and a closet bedroom guitar guy, I can't help but write things that I go, oh man, that sounds like Alex Lifeson, or oh, that sounds a lot like, Jimmy Page, or, I mean, it just is what it is. There's only 12 notes. You can't, you can't suddenly make something completely without influence, but you can create where you're using foundational sounds that you've heard from other things, but then you build your own thing, which you guys absolutely did and do. Let's talk about the demo, Esoteric Emotions, released in July 93, reissued in 2017, I believe, as a 25th anniversary.
Yeah, I think it was, yeah.
Okay, I don't have that reissue. I don't actually own this one.
I'll send you.
Don't worry about that, but that's super cool. But let's talk about how that came about, like when you got the opportunity to do so, and then how that consequentially led to the interest in signing with Aesthetic Death.
Okay, so basically, when we first started the band, somehow, I don't know how, but somehow we were quite organized, and we used to do regular rehearsals, and we knew that back then we knew that if we wanted to do a demo, we'd have to hire a studio to do it. There was no home recording back then.
Right.
So basically we each saved like a few pounds, like about 10 quid each once a month, pulled it together. And then by the time we'd been going for like nearly a year, we had the money to spend a couple of days in the studio, which is what we did. So we spent, I think, 2.5 days in the studio, did the demo live, just whole backline live, drums, guitars, bass, all down live. And then we just did a few guitar solo, lead guitar parts and synth overdubs and vocals overdubbed. And that was it, really. And it was just a very quick mix and off to press the tape.
That was who did the production work, or you just had an engineer, I guess?
Yeah, we just hired a local studio, and it was a local engineer. He wasn't into metal or rock or anything, so he didn't really have any space. And it was such a quick session anyway. It was just a case of getting it down, one take done. Get it down, one take done. There was no time to have any finesse over anything, and we didn't have. By that point, I mean, we were all young. We were pretty broke. We didn't really have money to buy our own proper equipment and so on. So.
Did you use studio equipment or did you rent it?
Yeah, we used studio drum kit. I can't remember if we had our own amps or not at that stage. We had pretty cheap transistor amps anyway.
Oh, okay, right. What were you playing guitar wise? Do you remember that?
By that point, I didn't actually record guitar in the band at that point.
Oh, that's
I was just doing the vocals. But I had an old Ibanez that I bought secondhand. My first guitar was really, really poor, like a really cheap guitar. And cheap, you didn't have really, there wasn't much choice of cheap guitars. But then the one I had, my first one, was like a plastic neck. It was really bad.
Oh, man. Wow.
It's a name you wouldn't even recognize.
Right.
And, but the first like half decent guitar I got was like a mid-price secondhand Ibanez. So I was probably using that around then, about 93. Yeah, like that.
Those old 70s, 70s and early 80s guitars. You had 9 million Chinese manufacturers out there. Stella, Lark, Silvertone, all these, the Sears used to sell those. Sears department store here in the States would sell these, I think they were called Silvertones or something like that. Just really, just really garbage fucking guitars,
Yeah.
My very first acoustic, my very first real acoustic was a Alvarez Yari, which was a really nice guitar, nice guitar. But I got really loaded one night. I think it was like my 21st birthday. I got really loaded one night, was really angry at my girlfriend, and because I found out she was messing around on me, and I walked into my apartment and I kicked my guitar, which was laying in the hallway like an idiot, put a nice big hole in it. That was the end of that.
Oh, no.
And that was a really nice guitar, man. That probably now would be worth some money. The stories of stupid shit you do when you're drinking,
Yeah.
Don't have guitars near me when I'm drinking. It's not a good thing. So actually, Alakazazm or whatever said 12 notes, Jeff, branch out. I wasn't talking about semitones, man. Come on. Sharps and flat. I was talking about whole tones. Come on. Cut me a break. I'm not some dumbass here. Okay. So you do the demo, and then Aesthetic Death comes calling, or how's that happen then?
Basically we shopping? We basically posted the demo around to different distributors. I think Stu from Aesthetic Death, he lives in Worcester, which is about 30 miles from Birmingham. And he would have been down for a gig at Edwards or somewhere like that. And he remembers it better than me, actually. But he gave me a flyer, and I contacted him after the gig, sent him a copy of the demo, said, "Do you want to distribute our demo?" He said, "Yeah," took some demos off us. And then after he got the demos and was listening to them, he'd already released a single, a 7-inch, with a band called Reprobate, a death metal band. Mm-hmm. And he said, I really like your music. It's something different to what's going on at the moment, and I'd really like to work with you on releasing an album. So basically that's where our deal with Aesthetic Death came from. And then we did the first 2 albums with Stu, and ever since, actually, he's been a really good friend of ours. He's a really good guy. That's like one of the most genuine, trustworthy guys you could ever meet. And
do you remember your budget?
Sorry?
Do you remember your budget for?
Yeah. For our first album, we had about £900. So we had about 4.5 days in the studio.
So about a little over $1,000 American then.
Yeah, basically.
Wow, holy shit!
Yeah, it wasn't a lot.
All right, so is that on 2-inch tape? You're doing that? No kidding.
Basically, our first 2 albums Well, our first demo on our first album were recorded live to 2-inch tape with just a handful of overdubs.
Wow.
And the first album was mixed in a day. We spent 3.5 days in the recording process and spent a day mixing, and it wasn't even mastered either. The DAT went straight. I mean, we were young and naive. We didn't know that we needed to get it mastered as well. So that's why we mastered it later on.
That's insane. That's insane. Like, were you pulling pretty much 24-hour all-nighters to get all that?
No,
were you that well rehearsed? Were you guys that well rehearsed that you didn't really have to?
We did rehearse a lot in those days, but we didn't really get a proper solid drummer, like time-wise and ability-wise, until the third album, I'd say. So it was obviously a little bit rough around the edges, and it was done live. So you can't fix anything on 2-inch tape. You can edit a different part of the reel, but you can't edit like people do nowadays. So basically, all warts and everything else is, it's committed to tape and it stays there. And I think it's actually a good lesson for bands when you're young to go into a studio, do a recording without any editing, hear how much more you need to practice, and then come back and a lot better. Because I think that's really important.
But as an engineer, now with Pro Tools that you don't have to do that at all. And you can get 4 bars down and then you can just cut and paste. And it's, I mean, I don't know, because I don't work in a studio like you do, and we'll talk about that in a bit. But it just seems like such and you've got auto tune, and you've got pitch correct, and you've got quantization, and all this shit that bands 25, 30 years ago, man, if you didn't nail it, well, even going back further, think about like the jazz cats, in the 40s and 50s, where if you didn't fucking nail it, man, you were costing a lot of money hourly, and it was. The
studio rates were just as expensive back then as they are now. Studio rates are no more expensive 30 years on than they were then.
Really?
Yeah. So it was relative to what things cost at the time. It was more expensive to hire a studio than it is now.
Yeah. And you said you had about $1,000 to do that. So you did it in basically 4 days, it sounds like, right?
Yeah. Yeah. 4.5 days we had, and basically just had to get it down live, warts and all, and some overdubs, and then just a day mixing.
Now you mentioned drummers, and you do have that sort of Spinal Tap vibe going on a lot of the time with your drum seat. I don't know if these guys self-immolate or if they just are, abducted by aliens, or what happens to them. But the guy that was originally in the seat there, he was just there for the demo, right? Or was he on the first album?
No, he was on the first album as well.
But
our first drummer was a friend of ours at the time. He didn't play drums. We had such trouble finding a drummer. I mean, it's still quite commonly hard to find a drummer anyway. That's why most drummers are in several bands. But back then, trying to find a metal drummer was hard enough. But trying to find a metal drummer that didn't want to play at 100 miles an hour,
exactly.
Yeah.
Most drummers are like, "Wait, you want me to do what? You want to play a 20-minute song where I get to play just some cymbals and occasionally the kick drum?"
Yeah.
Let me think about that. I'll get back to you guys.
Yeah. So basically, our first drummer wasn't a drummer at all. He joined the band and became a drummer while he was on the job. So to be fair to him, he didn't have much time. Like when we recorded the first demo, he'd only been playing the drums less than a year. And then when we recorded the album, he'd been playing like just under 2 years. So he didn't have a great deal of experience behind him.
Rick has a serious question for you here. See, this is why I'm afraid to let him in later on. But he says, serious question, does more cowbell ever make things better in the studio? Of course, Rick. Come on, man. Jesus Christ. Like, you really had to ask that question. All you got to do is ask Will Ferrell, dude. That's all you got to do. So this is the demo for me is a more straightforward quasi death metal. It's got much more death metal influence than what we're going to come up with in '94 with the first proper album.
Mainly because we didn't really have much of our own equipment by that point.
And this was it down to the influences too at that point in time that you were still trying to
a little bit
sort out your sound?
It was also because we didn't. We still by that point we hadn't amassed much. We had a handful of effects between us. You know, and by the time we recorded the first album, we had, you know, more serious dedicated units for each instrument and the vocals. So we were basically, for the first album, we were working on the sounds, on the effects in rehearsal at home. Before we got to the studio, everything was kind of already done and laid out.
Do you remember what distortion pedals you were using back? Or well, you weren't playing guitar, but what distortion were you using? Was like
I remember anyway. Yeah, we were using Metal Zones back then.
Metal Zones. There you go.
We had cheap Laney transistor amps and Metal Zone distortion pedals.
But you stayed away from the HM2 clearly, right?
Yeah, we stayed away from the HM2 back then.
Nick, I'm sorry you heard that. One of my buddies in the chat. Nick, I know you're probably about to start crying right now, but Greg's not an HM2 guy. It's just the reality of it, you know. Yeah, so there's a lot, you know, for me, there's a lot to like about this demo, and I must admit, and I think I told you, I'd never heard this before.
Yeah.
I was like, wait, there's a demo? And so I want to say 4 or 5 days ago, maybe a week ago when we got this started to get this together. So first place I started because I'm like, why you always thought epistemological was it? But you know, that was kind of stupid of me to think that way. And it's considerably different overall. Yes, the long songs are there, and yes, there's the vibe is starting, if you will. But again, for one thing, your affected vocals very different on that demo than they are later. You're starting to do things with them, but they're more straightforward, I think.
Yeah. It was studio effects that we used on the vocals on the demo. So we didn't have the time. We didn't have time to experiment or do anything complicated with it. It was just basically try this sound, whack it down, and that was it. Really, that's as far as it went for the demo.
What did you use? Do you remember in the studio? Do you remember any of the things that we're using?
I think we used something like a combination of like an Elysis MIDI verb, maybe, and an old lexicon. Maybe
lexicon, yeah, like the 42 or something like that with the good delay.
I think it was more basic than the 42, even, to be honest. I think it was an LXP, but I don't remember it specifically. It might have been, I don't remember it, specifically what it was back then.
I had and this would have been right around that time, 94. I think is when I bought it. I bought a Lexicon Reflex, which maybe it was that one because that was the cheap one. And I remember, doing like guitarscapes with it on 4-track where I just, I'd ramp the fucking repeater up all the way and it would just be these crazy long glacial, and then you'd hear all the you'd just start twiddling knobs and coming up with strange oscillations and stuff. And then you throw some vocal effects in there. So I should have known that. And I still have that somewhere. I think my kid has it now, but great effect for relatively cheap versus the PCM42s, which were not cheap back then,
No.
So I give this a 6.5, which I think is reasonable based on just where you guys are at, as far as
we never look back on the demo and think of it as anything special. It was just something. It was just basically the very first kind of basic writing of the band. It wasn't developed enough, really. Too much repetition, not enough experimentation. Not. It's not something. I mean, the reason it for so long is because it's not something we kind of look back on with and think it's a good release. But we did it because we re-released it mainly because we were being asked for it a lot, and we were seeing bootlegs selling for ridiculous money and so on. So,
did you do you ever play any tunes off that ever?
No.
Okay.
No.
Just not in your wheelhouse to do them anymore. So we
could do it, but we don't really want to.
Yeah, you're not going to honor the 50th anniversary, play the whole album thing then, right? let's move on to epistemological. We'll pull this bad boy out here, and I'll blow. I apologize for the glare, but it's just how it is. So this and this I bought at the same time, and as I told Greg privately, I was alerted to Esoteric by Stephen Wilson of Porcupine Tree fame. He kind of was like, "Hey man, you need to check these guys out." This is when I finally started to go, "Okay, there's something to this death metal thing now. I get you." Okay, and got these from Aquarius Records out in San Francisco, which is no longer around anymore. These are the original OG Esoterics. I'm sorry, Aesthetic Death copies. And man, the first thing you're struck by is, oh, cool, it's a double disc. Oh, okay. And then you start looking and you're like, and also the artwork is just really badass. I want to ask you about that in a minute here. You got just some crazy artwork from a geometric design standpoint. Probably, I'm guessing you guys didn't have much of a budget to go crazy and do some really, Travis Smith scene piece, something like that. Tell me about, it's definitely a departure from the demo in that there's much more psychedelic elements added. The vocal processing is much more prominently featured. Talk about your memories of writing and recording this album and what you can tell me about it.
From a rehearsal point of view, we kind of kicked up things quite a bit rehearsal wise, because I think during the time of the demo we were mostly kind of like still studying. Most of us are still studying colleges. Right. By the time we did the first album, we were either working part-time or basically had a bit more time on our hands to I mean, most of us actually worked part-time while we were studying as well. So we rehearsed a lot more. We got more into a lot heavier into the effects side of things and into learning how to get the best out of our equipment. And just had a bit more money to kind of invest really in build up the gear. So we're rehearsing like 2 or 3 times a week, I guess, and we hung out together a lot as well. Okay. Working on writing or listening.
Going to shows.
You're going to shows, listening back to rehearsals together, working out what we were going to do with the music and so on.
Okay, so there's a question there. You're rehearsing, and are you actually recording while you're rehearsing? You're doing like a boombox recording, or what do you?
Basically, okay. A lot of the time we would,
So in other words, I was wondering because that really is the only way you could have done this, unless you had your own board to record. Because the thing about your music is, and it gets far more complex as it goes along, is that because of that complexity, you can't just go, well, we're going to do 4 bars of this and 2 bars of that, and then we're going to do 4 bars of that, and then we're going to do, it becomes, because a lot of your stuff is not linear at all. There's rarely a verse, chorus, bridge, verse, chorus thing. It's just not like that. It's kind of this slowly developing, and hopefully you'll laugh at this, but it's sort of this slowly developing cancerous thing that just keeps eating away at its, or growing rather, not eating away, but it is eating away and growing at the same time. You've got this amorphous sort of form. There is, yes, the songs often have some linearness to them, but not really. It's a lot of movement, and yet they all, and I'm thinking, listening to this stuff again, Greg, and I'm not going to lie to you and say, I've been listening to this for like the last 5 years. Every time I pull this album out, I pull this stuff out on occasion. And I'm always like mind blown and thinking, how do they fucking know what they're doing to write a song like this?
Yeah. It's not, I mean, it's, I don't know, to be honest. I think basically we always had the intention of writing without any kind of boundaries. So, and not with your typical kind of verse, chorus, repeating sections and so on. We wanted it to be more like a trip, more like something that modulates and changes over time rather than repeats too often. We do have some songs which which have sections that repeat, but it's not too common. More so, I'd say it's more similar to classical music in a way, in the way that can be written in that you might have a theme, but then you've got a lot of modulations upon that theme,
right?
That kind of like grow as the song goes on.
And one of the questions I had that early on was, how did how did you write? And it does appear that, at least on the first album here, reading it, that there are you do delineate that you were primarily the lyric writer, obviously, as a singer, but there are like specific, notations of Simon or Brian or whatever.
Yeah.
But I gotta believe that when you're in there and actually rehearsing this stuff, everybody's starting to kind of add spice to the.
Yeah, of course, yeah. You might say, for example, sorry, Karen.
Go ahead.
We might, for example, say someone's written some riffs for a song, or they've got like a basic arrangement or certain instrument or a few instruments that they've kind of pieced together, and then we'll take those ideas into rehearsal. Then we'll experiment with them. Then we'll start to work on them together as a band. So then they'll grow.
Right.
Someone, say for example, you start with a particular bass line on a song. By the time that song's got from where it started to where we're ready to record it, the bass line will be interpreted differently, or it'll be modulated, it'll be changed. It was a case that often the starting point would grow into something quite different by the end.
By the end. Yeah. I love here. It says, and got my old man glasses on, but I can't read with them. It says, thanks to all who helped or supported us. Many we have thanked in person. And then there's the fuck off and die list. Society, number 1. Okay. The monarchy, I get it.
Yeah.
The pigs, fucking bastards. I kind of get that. Yeah. Politicians, the government, all holy denominations, and followers of the right hand path. I like that. That was tricky. You were thinking there. Moralistic bastards, the legal system, all oppressors and authority. Man, you guys were kind of pissed back then a little bit, right?
Yeah, we're quite anti-authoritarian, young and rebellious, and young, broken, rebellious.
Yeah. What's the English show with the 4 guys? The young
ones, yeah,
the young ones, yeah. I mean, oh god, so good, so good. Let's see. What was the importance of the monochromatic and kaleidoscopic artwork to the aesthetic? Was there anything, or was it just that's all you had the money for?
Oh no, that was the up art was kind of created by Simon, who is one of the guitarists.
Mm-hmm.
He's actually a really good artist. All of that was done by hand.
Oh really?
Yeah, it's done by hand using the cover of Epistemological, that was all done by hand with a pen using geometric implements as well.
Wow.
But it was basically done by hand. And the same on the second album, the cover, that was done a mixture of geometric instruments and airbrush. It was painted with an airbrush.
So he did all this stuff, all the interior artwork.
Yeah, he did all of that himself.
Oh, that's incredible, man. You hear that, Rick? You're not the only artist around here, man. Rick does all my thumb stuff for me.
Cool.
How about let's see. Yeah. So this album was apparently recorded in 10 days. You went from 4 to 10. You got a whole week and 3 days, or is that not right?
On the second album, the second Pernicious Enigma, I think we spent about 2.5 weeks in the studio in total, including mixing. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Maybe I put that in the wrong section there, because I thought it said epistemological was 10 days. How long was that one?
Epistemological was 4.5, including.
That was 4.5.
Yeah, that was really quick.
Oh shit. Okay.
Yeah.
Wow, that's crazy, man.
Yeah.
So we already talked about rehearsing was a huge part of that. What now you did call me out here a little bit, and you can explain to everybody what I said. My one criticism was in particular, that on the drum sound on Eradication,
yeah,
at certain points during the sludgy section, it sounds like there's some sort of weird level changes, and there's almost like a floppy cardboard. It sounds like somebody's beating on a cardboard pizza box or something in that song. I'm like, what the fuck is this? Because the rest of them,
well, it was supposed to be like it was done intentionally.
Okay.
It was an effect, like a gated slapback effect that was put on the drums. It was to kind of make it a bit more industrial sounding.
Yeah.
But it was done clunkily because the whole album was mixed in a day, so everything was kind of flowing in rather quickly and on the fly. And
now that one was, you said ADAT or not?
No, that was 2 inches. Well,
that was 2 inch. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah.
ADAT was the second album.
A little bit of a pizza box thing on that one. That's all I'm saying. That's all.
Yeah,
not that I could have done it any better. I'm just saying. High points for me are the epic 26-minute closing track, Awaiting My Death, man. That is that's where you see where you guys are. It all comes together on this album. That's the track that it's like, whoa, okay, this is pretty fucking badass stuff. And it just gets better and better and better. But that song is killer, sprawling and crawling, insanely good. Also, it's very melodic, and so is Lamented Despondency. That's a great track too. Very melodic. You can kind of hear some.
That one's probably the most melodic song on the album, I'd say.
Yeah, and you can definitely hear there's I don't know that post rock was a thing then. It probably wasn't, but there's a bit of a post rock vibe to it in the more serene, quieter sections. This is a beautiful track. I give it a 7.5 out of 10. Now, Only Hate is really a weird track on there, dude.
Yeah.
It's like it comes out of left field and you're like, what the hell is this? It's kind of punky.
Yeah.
Okay, so tell me about that one real quick.
It was just to be honest, I was never a huge fan of the kind of short death metal tracks we did back then. But I don't know. It is what it is, really. It's maybe it doesn't fit with the rest of the stuff so much. But
you're being democratic, so it's like somebody comes with that song, and you're like, okay, we'll throw it on.
Yeah, we did use it. It was enjoyable to play rather than to listen to, should we say?
Okay, so, there you go.
We do like to put the odd fast bit in our music, but I think it tends to work better when we do it within the structure of a song which has different tempos rather than just do something fast.
Right. It's my least favorite track, and you probably hear that from other people as well, I'm sure. But I get why you were doing it, somewhat.
Yeah. We basically just didn't want to just do. We didn't mind trying something different, basically.
Right.
If it didn't work, it didn't work.
You didn't want to just do all 26-minute tracks. Come on, that would only necessitate like a 4-disc set every album. And the funny thing is, I was thinking about this before we started today, and we decided to do a 2-parter earlier when we were emailing. And I'm like, they only have 7 albums. Oh, fuck. But 5 of them are double albums. So it's really like listening to 12 albums. It was like I underestimated the fact that I forgot how long these albums are. But they're long, but generally, man, they're just of such high quality. And we'll get to that here. Speaking of high quality, Pernicious Enigma, that's one of everybody's favorite albums. Comes out in April 97. It was remastered, reissued in 28. I've not heard the remaster yet. I believe that the edition I was listening to was obviously it's the OG. Curious about that, and we'll get to that in a minute.
Sure.
For the use of synths suddenly become much bigger element of your sound at this point.
Yeah.
The tracks are very cinematic, glacially paced. The tempo most of the time. They conjure up a strange hypnotic vibe in the overall sound, like you're trapped in a narcotic dream you can't quite wake up from, but you're sort of drowning in this thing. And dude, I totally forgot how fucking amazing this album is. Like you throw it in, and right off the bat with yes, I should know the track names. I apologize. I don't.
That's right.
Off the top of my head. But Creation Through Destruction, man. You just start off and right away you're like, Wow. And I use headphones, just the iPhone headphones, which aren't great. But man, you guys are such a headphone band. Like already right away, it's like you've got that swirling mass of everything going on around you. You feel like you're immersed in the album. What was behind the decision to go in the direction with a lot more synth and sort of orchestration? Whether it was, I don't think you had actual real orchestras here, but you were using synths and whatnot. And adding a lot more melody to the overall sound. What was the thought process there?
It wasn't really a conscious decision. It was just the fact that basically, I think we actually managed to, he managed to get hold of like a little module, and he had an old synth as well. We used a synth on the first album, even on the demo. He had an old Gen synthesizer that his neighbor, who didn't play anymore, gave him. And so we kind of like just developed a bit more by adding some keyboard sounds, really. I mean, we didn't add that much, really. Some of the time, I think some of the guitar effects may sound like keyboards or synths.
They do.
They're actually guitars or even vocal effects.
Right.
But there is some, but there was a more conscious use of keyboard parts as well. Creation, actually, the first part of that song, in fact, the first couple of sections of that song were actually, I wrote that on a piano. That's why I decided to add the kind of string sounds when we were in the studio. So I think it was just a natural progression, really, not something that we just to add an extra kind of element to the music. And we also, I mean, we'd already been using some samples and stuff like that as well. And
yeah, you weren't afraid as a death or doom death or whatever you were at that time. Like we said, that kind of came, the genreification name kind of came later, but at that point in time in the early 90s, it really wasn't, you were just a doom band, basically, death doom. And you weren't afraid to go down the road of using the synths and embellishing things with a lot more what's the word? Spacious sounds that you hear on this album. You used a session drummer named Anthony Brewer to record these tracks.
Yeah.
Was he given basic demos to guide him through these sessions, or did he?
Yeah. I mean, basically, because we didn't have a drummer, our original drummer, Darren, left after the first album. He left the band, and we did basically most of the songwriting for the second album, most of the rehearsing just round at Gordon's flat at the time, or round at Brian's flat, and we basically just rehearsed through the stereo. And Gordon had an Amiga then, which he had software called Optimed on. It's just like very basic, like I think it was an 8-track sequencer, 8-track sequencer. So we programmed the drums there, recorded demos live in while we were rehearsing. I can't remember. I think we got a 4-track then as well when we were doing the second album. At some point, I think we got a 4-track and started doing demos on that as well. And so we met Anthony through. I think he knew someone that we knew at the time, so he basically decided he agreed to record with us to do the session, and we were rehearsing with him for a few months before the album.
Mm-hmm.
But he was slightly younger than us at the time. I think at the time that was 96. Yeah, so we were like about 22, 23 doing the second album, and he was like 18, 19. Wow. So he was a little bit overwhelmed with what he had to learn in time. That's why some of the tracks ended up being just the program drums on that album rather than the real drum kit.
So there's a mixture in there then.
Yeah.
You can't, going back, I'm trying to think. I can usually pick up on that.
Yeah.
I don't recall picking up on that. I may not have been listening that close, but I did, let's be honest. I'm going to be fair here. I don't really listen to Esoteric for the drum work.
Yeah, sure.
It's not, and that's not a criticism of any of your drummers. It's just that's not the thing that stands out, and yet it might be one of the more complex part of your sound because, like you said, most drummers want to go, 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 go.
Yeah.
They don't want to. They don't want to hold back and accent and ghost note and things like that. That's a very hard thing. I think it's got to be a really difficult thing to play drums for you guys because you have to practice restraint majorly. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, basically, since the third album, we've been working with really good drummers. The guy on the third and fourth album was a very experienced session drummer, and the guy that's been in the band for the last like 15 years, Joe, he's a very accomplished drummer. So he gets the balance right between showing enough restraint and embellishing more when he needs to, I think.
Right.
And
Yeah. You can definitely tell from the early albums. You can tell there's a leveling up of the drum seat. So let's see. Hang on a sec here. I want to make sure. Okay, so Dominions and Slaves, Dominion of Slaves and Allegiance are so fucking sinister, dude. Like that pairing is just evil, goddamn evil, as I say. Cinematic, especially Allegiance. It's hard to figure out how you guys repeatedly started to make incredibly long, droning tracks of misery, yet keep them generally gripping and interesting. Talk about how songs like those two above start out and develop. Are you recording? Well, we kind of answered this. Are you recording live rehearsals at this point? But what do you remember of those two tracks? Because those, to me, are for me, the standout tracks.
I mean, basically, Allegiance was just started from a bass line that Brian had written. He wrote them the bulk of the kind of skeleton of the song, if you like.
Right.
And then we added, we all added parts to it. We added the guitars, the rhythm guitars, the lead guitars, and because like the start of the song is kind of like based around a flattened second, so that's why it sounds quite sinister. And just the layers basically is what kind of developed it and made it kind of modulate more as the song went on.
When you guys are practicing or rehearsing, do you actually, as you're playing something, if somebody comes up with something that's kind of dark and menacing and evil, do you guys kind of like go, dude, that's fucking sinister, let's use that? I can just imagine all you guys sitting around having a few beers or whatever else you might be partaking in, which we'll talk about in a minute. But I could just imagine you going, dude, what was that you just played there? Play that again. You don't say dude because you guys don't say dude in the UK. You go, mate, play that again.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
Hello, mate, play that. But I could just imagine you guys doing that and going, that's fucking evil, man. Let's do that, right?
Yeah, basically we'd record stuff and then just kind of cherry pick the bits that we kind of liked from it and repeat the good parts and discard the bad parts.
Well, I made this note here. If you don't play, if you're not a guitarist or a musician, you're just an appreciator of these songs and your band and this music, I don't think you can honestly comprehend how difficult it is to write songs like this. As we said, these are not simple, and this is not denigrating the Beatles because the Beatles were very complex writers, actually, but or ABBA, same thing. ABBA, very complex pop songs,
very much so.
But they're not. I don't know. I'm trying to think of REM or something. Well, that's shitting on them too. I'm not trying to shit on other bands, but there are bands that write these bubblegum pop songs that are 4 chords in their first chorus, bridge, and that's shit simple. You can do that stuff in your sleep if you're a player. The stuff you guys are writing, you can't just write a track like this in a day or two. It has to.
Yeah, it takes more time because you're not really repeating you're changing stuff around. But I don't know. It's just the way we've always kind of done it, really. So we don't really think about it too much.
Yeah, don't look it in the eye, because if you look it in the eye too much, it might run away from you, right?
Yeah.
Okay. And I also said this is proggy death funeral doom. That's what you're starting to develop.
Yeah.
That's my feeling, anyways. All right. So what the hell is NOXBX title referred to? Is it? I'm going to postulate. Is it a pharmaceutical
No,
of some sort? Okay, all right.
no, it's basically we didn't really have a title. It was an improvisation that we did in the studio. We didn't really have a title for it because there weren't really any lyrics for it. There are some words that I did on the vocals, but I don't actually recall what they were. But basically, the song was just a planned improvisation, but that we hadn't actually rehearsed or anything. So all that we based it around was that we were going to do something in the diminished scale. And so if everyone stuck to that, then it would have some kind of level of cohesion. And because we did it live in the studio with a line of sight between us, we could actually kind of pick up and feed off each other a bit because we could see and hear what we were playing.
Yeah, it's probably the least complex track because you're doing it.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
All at once, but it's got a real vibe to it. It's got a real atmosphere to it. It's kind of trippy and spacey and weird and just cool as fuck. Were you high when you did it?
Probably. I can't remember. I know you're smoking something.
Listen, I know you've talked about this in interviews, so I'm gonna go there a little bit. I know that you know the marijuana, for God's sake, everybody smokes it now. You know, it's the cool thing to do. But how much of an effect were psychedelics on this kind of era for you?
Oh, pretty strong effect, I'd say. And I think that was why the music ended up as kind of affected and trippy as it did, is because we used to do partake
like mushrooms.
Mushrooms, acid, hallucinogens in general, microdots, and obviously smoking as well. But I mean, mushrooms grow quite readily in the UK anyway, if you know where to find them at the right season.
I'll be over in about 12 hours. Just saying.
A bit later in the year.
Did you hear that, Nick? Oh, he dipped out. My buddy Nick is a connoisseur of the fungi. I have never done them.
Mm-hmm.
I've been thinking about microdosing a little bit with my issue. I'm thinking about it, but I've used medical weed. I was not a big weed guy either until the last couple of years, and it helps sometimes, doesn't.
Mm-hmm.
But personally, I'm never gonna do LSD or any of the heavy psychedelics because I'm that guy that would have a bad idea going in, and that's a bad idea right from the start.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So using those substances, they just opened up like a Pandora's box of exploration, I guess.
Kind of, yeah. I mean, I think what it does is it kind of gives you different experiences of different kind of states of consciousness that you're not really privy to under a normal, especially like LSD, where it can be quite strong, and the sensations and the visuals can be pretty strong. Well, even mushrooms can if you do enough, but
right.
It kind of gave us this visual kind of element to the music, I would say. This kind of
synesthesia. It's almost like a synesthesia, where you're hearing
kind of
hearing colors and sounds.
Basically,
it's giving you. Yeah, and I've never tried that, and that's the one thing that kind of is interesting to me to try, because I hear people that do have synesthesia. They hear things and they see colors and feelings and emotions and things, and you're like, whoa, that sounds pretty fucking cool, you know?
Yeah, I'd say it's just like the heightening of the senses and the experience. I mean, a lot of hallucinogens, they tend to kind of push you on an introspective journey as well in the mind, especially when you're kind of in a more kind of like getting towards the end of a trip and you're kind of internalizing and thinking and facing your inner thoughts and feelings. And so it can be quite useful, I think, for introspection.
Was everybody in the band doing that, or was it just specific people? Or
it was pretty back then. It was pretty much everyone in the band was doing it.
Talk briefly about here real quick. At War with the Race seems kind of out of place. That's another one like the track from hatred off of the epistemological. But there are some cool samples on this one. Where are those samples from?
They were from Full Metal Jacket, I think.
Was that used? Was that all the stuff that was used throughout the album, or were there other movies?
No, there were a few different sources. Some obscure, like not famous,
like horror movies.
Some from horror movies. Some from like some from war movies and so on, and some from documentaries. So just varied, really.
Very cool, very cool. Speaking of that and samples, just out of curiosity, because I just thought of it, you familiar with Boards of Canada?
No.
I gotta turn you on to them, dude. Mm-hmm. Gotta turn you on to them. We gotta talk. Just hold that thought. So talk briefly about the remaster that came out in 2016. As I know there were some issues with the original mix and master for you guys, and it led you on a path. I believe this album was kind of what led you on a path to start learning, officially becoming school learned about engineering and production.
Yeah, that's right. Basically, the studio we worked in at the time, we were having issues with the mix. It was basically an old Soundtracks analog mixing desk, and it had it's an old Megas, and it had what is called a VCA automation. So it didn't have motorized faders, but it had VCA voltage control amplifiers. So basically, the track mix software, which you ran the VCA automation from, when we were doing the mixing and updating the automation, it was losing stuff. It was losing information we were doing in, and it just generally was buggy and not behaving properly.
Right.
And because we were only recording on 24 tracks, and because we'd loaded the tracks and we're track sharing, like one track could be keyboard part on one section and a guitar part on another. So we had to basically try and mix something in real time using the automation software to update, listen back, and so on. But then because of the bugs and the problems and just the general poor monitoring in the studio that we were using, the album didn't really sound like we anticipated it would sound when we finished it. The original release of Pernicious Enigma was actually the second mix, because the first mix that we did, we took it out of the studio, and it was so bottom heavy that literally like hi-fis couldn't really reproduce the sound. It was just like farting and breaking up.
So the subwoofers were just blowing out, basically.
Yeah, basically like it just sounded like a mess, and the levels didn't feel like comparative to how they sounded in the studio. So we basically went back to it, remixed it, and we had less time when we remixed it as well because of budget.
Right.
And because we hadn't really budgeted for going back to the studio at all.
Right. Was this Steve? What was your budget on this one? About the same? Was the budget the same?
The budget, we had a bigger budget for the second album than we did for the first album.
Okay.
It was like 3 times the budget, if not more.
Okay. Still not a lot though. Still not a huge.
Yeah, still not loads of money, but we had. I think we spent like about 2 weeks, maybe 10 days recording, and I can't remember exactly because it was a longer period.
Right.
And then we spent about 5 days mixing, and then we had to spend, because it was all on tape in those days. It was all on digital tape.
Right.
On the second album, it was digital tape. We're using ADATs. When we had to, because you know how the album is segued, so that you've got a song, then you've got like some transitions, some segue effects parts or samples, then you got another song. We linked the whole album together. So of course that process itself took a day, because we had to take stuff from one tape, record it to another tape, then move it.
Wow.
And so it was all done in real time, like in the days before computers. So it had to basically we didn't have as much time when we came to remix it to spend on the mixing. We just kind of cleaned up the low end a bit and ended up with a mix that we weren't completely happy with at the time. So
And
when we had the
this is Steven Wilson now, which is clear up who Steven Wilson is. That's not Steven Wilson.
Yeah, so he's basically an engineer. He did the first album with this as well, actually.
Right.
So he was just an in-house engineer at the studio that we went to, and we went to that studio because we were rehearsing there, and it was one of the better studios in Birmingham. But I think no matter who we went to back then, even if we'd gone to an engineer that knew extreme metal, they probably wouldn't have known what kind of sound to give us anyway, because there was nothing at that time that we could say, here, this is a reference.
Yeah, reference point.
Because there wasn't really a reference point. We were trying to do something that is very experimental.
Yeah.
Very much heavier kind of guitar tones than death metal.
Oh, yeah. That brings up a good point. If I could interject real quick. What tuning are you guys playing at? Is it C standard?
No, B flat.
Oh, it's B flat.
Yeah.
Fucking A, dude.
So we started low, there, man. And it was quite low at the time. So we started quite low, and we just basically stayed there. So I think it's heavy enough, and we didn't really go to 7 strings or anything, or go down to like F tuning or stuff like that you can find with bands now.
Did you do many alternate? Was there many alternate tunings? Or were they usually standard in B flat?
No, just standard in B flat. We never really changed the tuning at all.
Okay. So you remixed and remastered it then, the new version?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, because we bought the A. We never managed to buy any of the 2-inch reels that we recorded on for the demo or first album because they were just so expensive. It's like £200 a reel of tape for like 20 minutes of tape back then.
Oh, wow.
So we couldn't afford, it would have cost us as much as the recording to take them. So we never, they would have just been reused by the studio. But with the Pernicious Enigma, because it was recorded onto ADAT tapes, and ADAT tapes are quite cheap, we managed to buy those at the time. And so I think it was 2011, I hired some ADAT machines from a higher place in London and basically transferred everything off there onto Pro Tools. And then remixed it later when I found time to do it. Wow,
I gotta hear that. I'll figure that out. I've got to check that out because I want to. I really don't think this sounds bad though, Greg. I don't. I hear kind of there's some muddiness in the low end, but it's not. It's part of the. In a weird way, it's part of the soup that I'm.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So I'd be interested to hear how much more clarity's in the remix.
Yeah, the remix, I wasn't trying to reinvent the wheel. I just wanted to bring out some of the details of the original songs that were lost. So just to make some of the music clearer, basically, and to bring out some of the parts which got buried in the original mix, like some of the parts of the drum performance, for example, or parts of the effects, or maybe some notes on the guitar leads that you couldn't really make out in the original mix. It was just to basically clear things up a bit. So,
Cool. So my real quick hitters on this are that they're what do we got here? Yeah, the last 3 tracks on disc 2, Killer, Passing Through Matter, another classic esoteric mind fuck of a track, just brutal but beautiful. And that's if anyone ever came up to me and said, well, what's this band like? It'd be like, they're fucking brutal but beautiful. And I remember like hearing your vocals, of course with Michael from Opeth, that was the Blackwater Park was the first death metal album I really checked out, and it's a masterpiece, obviously.
Yeah.
But Mike's vocals are they're a vocal. You know what I mean? That clearly his death metal vocal was one of the best, the very best back in the day. And then he could do that amazing clean vocal, which he still can do. But when I first started getting into death metal, that's what I was kind of expecting to hear. And when I hear, I believe I grabbed those 2. Yeah, I grabbed those 2 and then Subconscious Disillusion. And what you started to do with your vocals, particularly on Pernicious, was it started to become part of the fabric of the music.
Yeah.
And it was almost like the words really didn't matter. And I don't mean that to denigrate your lyric writing or anything, but they become superfluous to the actual way that you're using your voice to, and the affected voice to affect the overall sonic landscape. So, 1 minute you're doing the, and then it's you throw this the scream in, and so you're just like, Jesus, what the fuck was that? Why? Well, why do you do that? And then you go back and listen again. You're like, oh, I get it now, man. It's part of, and that's what I think really sets you guys apart from all those other bands that were coming out in that genre. Your use of affected vocals was very different than all the other bands were doing.
Yeah, I mean, it was basically to try and create kind of like a more sense of chaos and just more soundscapes than just a raw vocal.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, there's an emotion in the performance as well. I mean, that's obviously par for the course, really. But I would say it was just to kind of follow the peaks and troughs of the music to kind of like lift when it needed to be lifted and to dull it down when it needed to come down. I'd say.
Yeah. It's, I mean, and this is really the album that started that. But let's talk about. And I give that a 9 out of 10. And the only reason I deduct a tiny little bit is I'm not crazy about that War with the Race. I'm just not crazy about that track, and that's just my subjective personal taste thing. But you got, I mean, there's the swirling synths, the evil clean. I mean, the clean guitar tones you guys always achieved is special too in metal. You don't, in death metal, you don't hear the clean tones that you guys tend to use much, and that was always something that appealed to me from a guitar player's standpoint. Layering and production on this album is absolutely killer. Despite it being literally 2 hours long, it never really feels boring or like each track is needlessly overlong. So again, an easy 9 out of 10. Probably a little higher, maybe a 9.5. 9.25. We'll give you a 9.25. Let's move on to Metamorphogenesis, released in August of '99 on Eban?
Yeah, Iban.
Okay. Yeah, Iban. This, along with the demo, are the only two esoterics I'd never heard before. I don't know how this one escaped me. It just did.
Yeah.
I have everything else, but this and those two. Holy fucking shit. Talk about leveling up even further, man. I always thought Dissolution was my favorite.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that's the case anymore after hearing this. I really don't. And the Maniacal Veil too. I hadn't listened to that in a long time. We'll get to that in part 2. But
yeah,
wow, this album, dude. This album is just fucking amazing. It's your shortest album, I do believe, at 44 minutes. I don't know what kind of drugs you were taking at that point in time that you figured, well, let's just make a short album, but something was going on there. What happened with, here's what I say. Oh, okay. What the fuck happened? You didn't drop 120 minutes plus of music on us again. What's going on there? How did you end up with Iban, and how did you end up with a short album?
Well, first things first with the label. Maro, who runs Iban, he was a friend of ours for many years. I first met Maro. He's from Milan in Italy. I first met him through tape trading. He was in a band called Russell Gethy. Excellent band. Check them out if you can.
I will.
And who later became a band called Canaan. And they were kind of like pretty extreme, doing a little bit more melodic, but great band from Italy back then in the early 90s. And he started Iban Records, and he'd been asking to work with us for years. And we'd done a couple of albums with Stu, and then decided to work with Maro for the next album. And part of the reason that the album came out, we just did a single album with 3 songs, was because the band was going through some transitional period at that point. So we'd gone from being like a 6-piece band on the first demo and the first 2 albums to being just 3 of us as permanent members 4 of us, sorry, in permanent members when we were doing Metamorphogenesis. So we didn't have a drummer to work with at the time. We still hadn't got a permanent drummer. We didn't carry on working with the guy that recorded on the second album because we weren't totally happy with what he was doing. Okay. And we basically kind of had 3 songs that we'd been working on, rehearsing together and jamming at home, and just decided to record those, really. The bass player at the time, he left the band just after we recorded the Metamorphogenesis. One of the third guitarists, Simon, who'd been in the band from the start, he left before we recorded the album. He left. He basically didn't want to play live anymore. Okay. Not that we were doing much back then anyway, but he kind of left just before we did a tour. So I basically, rather than trying to find another guitarist, seeing as I was playing guitar and writing music for the band anyway, just made sense for me to pick up the guitar. So for Metamorphogenesis, it was myself, Steve, Gordon, and Brian bass, and we basically, by this point, I'd started working full-time in recording studios, so we recorded the drums at the studio, at one of the studios I was working with, because they used to let the engineers have a free day each month. If there was a free day, so you could use the studio for yourself. So we did the drums in a day, and then we basically took the recording off the ADAT tapes. We basically used the budget from the label from Ivan to just buy some home recording gear, like a decent mic, decent preamp, and interface, and just did the rest of the recording at home. Which, in hindsight, I think we should have done more in the studio. But
what did you use back then? Like Cubase or Logic or what?
We used Sonar. Well, Cakewalk it was called.
Cakewalk, yeah, I remember Cakewalk. Yeah. I'm one of those guys that plays, but I'm stupid with software. So every time I had the real killer version of Logic, I could never figure out my ass from a tree. I was just like, why am I so stupid? I'm reading this book and it's not working. So I gave up my career. I would not be a good hire for you, Greg. So you guys, the one thing I noticed about that label I'm on, which I knew the name, but I didn't really know the roster. It's interesting. I didn't really know much on there other than Thurgothen, of course, but they've got Nordvarger, Call, and Svartsen. All heavy hitters in the dark ambient world. Like,
excellent
Nordvarger, MZ412, and all that crazy shit, right?
Yeah.
So was that any allure for you, or was it just that you just wanted to give it a shot with those guys?
No, it was just because we're friends with Mara. I think actually they released Call and stuff like that after our album.
Oh, okay. I didn't look when
I can't remember the chronology of it, to be honest. But yeah, he always had he had good taste, Mara did, with his own music as well, which you need to listen to.
Yeah, hey, I'm going to post it in here. Can you spell it for me?
Yeah, Ras Elgethi. It's RAS, then second word ALGETHI.
ALG.
ALGETHI.
Elgethi.
Yeah.
And what was the other one?
Canaan was the later band.
What was it again?
Canaan, CANAAN.
Oh, Canaan. Okay.
Yeah.
I know that name. I do know that name.
It's my accent.
Yeah, I know that name, but I don't know the music. I will definitely check those out. If you promise me you'll check out Boards of Canada, I got to get you on that, man.
Yeah.
We're moving quick here because I want to get you out of here at roughly a 2 hour mark.
Sure.
I just want to check my notes. I'm old. Remember, I'm old, and I have to look at my notes a minute. Oh, okay. Esoteric is known for incredibly dense, heavy low end in terms of bass frequency, but on Meta, there's a little extra something going on there, man. As far as how heavy and vicious that low end is, what was the secret sauce in that, dude? Because it is fucking it's like earth rendering heavy, man. It's like it just feels like.
But basically, it was because we had. Well, it was the first album that I recorded with the band myself, so it was the first album where we kind of got our sound down a bit closer to what we were kind of intending to go for. So with the heavier low end, but a bit more controlled. And secondly, it was just because we weren't restricted to 24 tracks anymore. We had, I mean, it was home recording, so it was basically limited by the computer processing, which was pretty poor.
Right,
it wasn't so bad for recording, but when we came to mix, it was almost impossible. But well, basically, it meant that we could record a lot more tracks and layers than we had done before. And if anything, we probably did went a bit overboard on that.
I'm trying to remember the early Cakewalk then from the late 90s. Was it limited in tracks? I can't remember.
If it was, it wasn't limited much. We definitely hit like over 100 tracks, I think.
That's what I thought. I'm trying to recall what that was like, but so yeah, that heavy end, man. I mean, Jesus Christ.
And it was mastered in a proper studio.
Okay.
Well, it was mastered in the same studio that we did the second album. Well, I went over to a friend of mine who's a master engineer, Tom, from a Norwegian band called Paradigma. I don't know if you're familiar with them.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And later he played in various other bands as well, like Dolem's Guard and so on.
Dolem's Guard, yeah. Isn't he on? Is he on? Oh, he's on this one, or was he on? I thought he was on Disillusion. He's on this one.
He's on Metamorphogenesis. Okay, yeah, he did some guest vocals because he came over to visit us while we were recording the album. So we recorded some guest vocals from him as well on second song, Secret of the Secret. And then when we'd finished mixing the album, I went over to Norway and he did the mastering, and he used part of the reason the low end is so vicious on the master as well is because he used a DBX 120 subharmonic. It's like an outboard rack thing which kind of enhances the subharmonic content. And he also went for a pretty loud master as well. So yeah, it ended up pretty thunderous.
Well, I gotta say, man, every track on here is killer. But man, Dissident, some of the riffs on there, woo, that one it's got a little extra ugly on it, man. It's just especially the latter half of the song where you start getting into the more what I'd almost call barely, but I'd almost call it's kind of an esoteric gallop, kind of.
Yeah,
it's kind of not exactly a Maiden-like gallop, but it's got that vibe to it. And again, the secret of the secret is, dude, this album just rules. I got to get this one. This one has to be in my collection. Man, just crushing.
I'll send you the. Have you got the original or the remix there?
I don't have that one. No. Metamorphosis is the only one I do not. Metamorphosis and the demo are the only ones I never got. I didn't even know about the demo.
We'll talk after, and I'll send you what you're missing.
Okay, so what I wanted to say here was, let's see, Meta's the only album I was unfamiliar with and didn't own besides the demo, and this thing blew my mind. The fact that it's only 44 minutes, I have to say, Greg, it kind of works in its favor.
Yeah.
Because it gets in, it beats the fuck out of you, and it gets out. You know what I mean? And it's these songs are viciously, crushingly heavy, but still very melodic. Lots of variations in the arrangements. It's a 9.75, man. It's so close to being perfect. I don't ever give 10s out, rarely, unless your name's Rush and it's Hemispheres or something like that. But man, it's a killer album. Well, look, we're gonna pick up with Subconscious Disillusion in part 2. I wanted to real quick, if I can keep you for a couple minutes.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
I wanted to quick add my buddy Rick. Are you going to jump in, Rick? Here's your opportunity, quick. And I want to talk to you a little bit about your studio career. Where is it? Where'd it go? Okay, so real quick here. The first question you kind of already answered. I wrote, was becoming an engineer, producer a byproduct of being a musician first, or did you go to school for audio engineering, such and such? Did you go to school for it, or did you just go in and sort of train? Okay. All right.
Yeah. I trained in a studio in the Midlands, actually, Coventry, that was basically set up specifically for teaching.
And you were also in college before when the band first started, or not?
I was in college just doing kind of learning. Well, I did like normal GCSEs, which is your first like 16-year-old exams. Then I did some advanced levels, which is college before you go to university. I studied I only chose subjects that I was kind of half decent at, really. So I did stuff like I did chemistry, English literature, philosophy, and I would have gone to university, but I decided not to go because I was only going just because I didn't know what else I wanted to do. So basically, I decided to leave that. I was going to go to actually study English and philosophy.
Be like a teacher or a professor, or
I would have ended up in a different industry where I was just as broke as going into music. So
I saw that line you did. I saw that interview you did, and you were like, I thought that was fucking hilarious. Where you're like, well, I'm just a little less broke, but I'm still broke.
Yeah,
that's killer. So you get into Priory as what, an engineer?
I worked freelance and I studied in a studio, Glasshouse Studios. Then I went to Richbit Studios where we had done our earlier recordings, and I started doing voluntary work there, helping out with the assisting engineer as an assistant engineer. And then I started working for the studio, but as a freelance engineer, because every engineer is freelance generally. You might get some in-house engineers that work in particular studios, but most of the time, back then anyway, most engineers were freelance working in various places. So I would work in Richbit Studios. I would work at other studios from time to time and do the odd live thing, and basically built up my portfolio and started working at Priory a couple of years later. And it wasn't called Priory then, it was owned by a different owner.
Okay.
And I worked here freelance for a few years. Then they asked me to run the studio for them. So I ran the studio for them as well as taking sessions. And then like a couple of years later, they went bankrupt with their other company, and I was able to basically take over the studio from them.
So you bought it essentially?
Yeah, essentially. Yeah, I kind of like paid them for the studio. Like got myself into a ton of debt, but it took like 15 years to get out.
Of course, that's what we do, right? Hey, I want to add this dude here now. No slobbering, no weeping, no crying or anything, dude.
Yeah.
Oh my god!
This is my buddy Rick. This guy, Greg. This guy.
How you doing, Greg?
Nice to meet you.
Let me just say this: this guy below me here has been.
You too, mate.
He's been so cool to me. He's done so much for me. He knows my situation very well, and so I wanted to bring him in to say hello to you. And I was talking over you, so I'm sorry.
Well, when he told me you were coming on, I just had like a little shriek, like. He
peed his pants a little bit. He's not telling the truth.
No joke. So I just dropped a video today, right? And it's one of those tag things. So it's like pick the most influential artists or whatever. So you pick the guy to talk about. So you just beat out Colin Marston on the list.
Wow.
So I'm like, so you're.
I know Colin is here.
I was gonna say, man. Colin.
You were it. But for whatever other reason, like I said, he was second running. But I don't know if you're familiar with Colin's work, but he's another very young dude, very good at what he does, like you, But man, I'm thinking about like way back in the day when you were doing this, like you must have been, I mean, everybody was young at that time, obviously, very young, and with the amount of stuff that you put out and just so highbrow that it is, you hit a bar, like even with those older albums, right? Like it's just it's there, and so literally like 10 minutes ago, I checked my mailbox. And this came in. Have you seen this album yet? Tribunal. So It's a band. It's a
Hang
band
on,
out
I have a bit
of
of a freezing issue. Did you see it?
Oh.
There you go.
Yeah, I saw it. Yeah, I saw it. Yeah.
So out of Vancouver. So everybody's trying to ape that sort of that Paradise Lost, My Dying Bride, because I know you mastered a My Dying Bride tribute album.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And that must have been first of all pretty cool, but also kind of crazy getting all these different bands, you know, trying to all sound, but they all have their own kind of style at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
You know, which is pretty cool. I know that with my line of work, I work in production art, and I'm last in line. So all the sales have been done, the creative and all that stuff. So then I'm at the end trying to fit these pieces. So I'm thinking when you guys are doing the master work, it's probably the same kind of principle. You know, you're kind of like the last checkpoint. To make sure all this stuff looks good, sounds good, you know, before it goes out the door. So that's another reason why I appreciate what you do. So in my video, I talked about also including your mastering, besides just your musicianship.
Thank
you.
We're
gonna appreciate everything about what you do.
We're gonna get to that in part 2 because as Greg got Greg's the only guy I've ever actually sent the questions to because he wanted to be a little prep for it. And when I got his email this afternoon, he's like, "This is pretty long." I said, Greg, I fucking warned you. I told you I don't fuck around, dude. I go hard and I go heavy.
Just not a 5-minute guy, you know. It's his little delay. 5 minutes is like 30 minutes, really.
So we're gonna touch on Lychgate and self-hypnosis in part 2. I had a couple more quick questions for you, and then I'm gonna get you out of here. Cool?
Yeah, sure.
All right. Okay. So is Priory a mix of analog and digital at this point, or is it all digital now?
No, it's a mixture of analog and digital. It's basically digital recording, so using Pro Tools with SSL interface converters and analog equipment. So basically analog mixing desks, lots of outboards equipment. And
what's your desk? What is it, Neve or what kind of desk?
It's Neve, yeah.
Neve, okay. That's pretty cool, man. How long have you owned it now, or how long have you been in debt to it?
17 years now.
Is it that long?
Yeah, 17 years. 2006 I took over,
yeah. So assuming your age, which I kind of knew was like in the late 40s, mid to late 40s, and the length of time in the recording industry, you likely worked in an analog environment for a good period of time prior to everything transitioning to digital. Can you talk about how that transition has gone for an old school engineer like yourself?
Yeah, I think it's just changed really. It's changed the way that the bands work, and it's also it's kind of open. I think there are more styles of music now, and there's more complicated music now as a result of the technology, because there are certain styles of music that if you're just recording strictly to tape and you're limited to a number of tracks, you probably wouldn't really get away with it in the just like in a band in a room recording to tape. So there are ways that things have progressed in terms of music production and how people also can demo stuff quite extensively at home. I think that can be beneficial in terms of creating more complicated songwriting. But I think there are also certain things where there's certain aspects of modern recording that detract, I think, from the music. And I think there's generally a bit too much of an obsession in current times for everything sounding a bit too clinical, a bit too surgical.
Yep.
And I think some of the feel and personality from music is getting lost because things are edited too much. Drums are triggered too heavily and so on. And there's not enough. If you do it too much, you go too far in one direction in terms of precision and quantization. You start to lose something from the musician. For my mind, you're always better off with a musician who's got as best a performance as they can give than to have something that's just completely perfect in every way.
Well, you think I don't know if you're I'm sure you're familiar with, but I don't know if you're a fan of. Are you of Steely Dan at all?
No, I'm not really, to be honest. I mean, it's not. I just don't know the music particularly well.
Man, the album Asia.
Yeah.
It's a fucking masterpiece. And the amount of work that went into that, those guys, Steve Gadd, this guy is just a sick drummer.
Yeah.
And from what I understand, that was 2 takes on that. And you don't have that shit going on anymore, Greg. There's just you're right. There's a little too much editing and triggering and vocal harm. You know, you got the auto-tune shit where I don't know, man. I don't know if I really like it a lot anymore. I guess I'm just old. I'm that old man pissing on
It's impressive. That's a good example because with the Steely Dan, I'm still hearing new things I haven't heard before every time I turn it on. With the Esoteric albums, it's kind of the same way. It's just there's so much stuff happening and just layers and textures. It's like it's really, really interesting. Like I think with the influence that you had, especially with that scene and what was going on over you English guys and Brits. Like I live in New Jersey. Like our claim to fame is this. Here we go. We got Evoken.
Yeah, I know Evoken,
that's ours.
Excellent. Yeah, great band.
Generally speaking, what are the most difficult performances to capture? Drums, vocals, guitar, other?
It doesn't matter about the instruments so much. It's more about the performance and the musician and their. I mean, basically, if you've got a really good musician and they're nailing their performance, that's more important than how good your microphone is, than how good your equipment is. The most important thing is the performance. And
that's what I'm getting at. Like, what do you normally find is who are the most temperamental? Is it vocals usually is the most difficult to get right?
I think with a melodic sung voice, it can be one of the most difficult to get right. It just depends, really. I mean, drums are probably the most complicated instrument to set up in a kind of typical band setup. Drums are probably the most complicated because there's more components to the drum kit as a whole, and it takes longer to set up. There's more elements of the drums to tune and to work on the sound and get the sound right in. But I think in terms of what your end product is, the most important thing is just the musician, how well practiced they are, because no matter what technology you have, there's still no substitute for practice. So practice is always the most important thing. Having an instrument that's well set up, and if you're talking about vocals, having a vocalist whose throat is in good condition for the voice for the recording, because if they've got a cold or if they've got any kind of constriction in their voice, then they're not going to get as good a performance. So it just depends. It's not necessarily the instrument that's harder than another instrument. It's just having everything to come together in the right way.
Right.
Yeah.
You kind of touched on this, but I guess I wanted to be more specific here. Has the digital age greatly reduced the live real feel of music, especially in extreme metal? Because I think it has.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. I mean, basically, the end listener is kind of accustomed to hearing an exaggeratedly loud, compressed, and highly edited end result, and most bands will probably err towards the side of getting things sounding perfect than they are to getting things sounding natural.
Right.
Yeah. I would say so anyway, generally. But
speaking of that,
there are plenty of exceptions. There are plenty of bands that will just go into a studio, get a good recording down, get good takes and performances, and say, don't edit the hell out of it. Let's just keep it kind of, real. Yeah. And I like that. I respect that.
Speaking of that,
do you consider yourself a perfectionist in that sense? Like, it must be hard to know where the stopping point is when it comes to that kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, when you're in the studio, you're listening on extremely sensitive speakers and in a controlled environment, a controlled acoustic environment. So you're going to hear the songs in more detail in the studio than you will on any other system that you listen to afterwards.
Right.
So you have to kind of make a judgment as to where the line should be drawn. Is that a good enough performance to move on and like keep a little bit of, keep the performance as real as possible, like if there's a wrong note, you've got to fix it. Doesn't matter how good a musician.
Right.
Everyone's going to hit a wrong note once in a blue moon. Your mind drifts and so on.
Yep.
But I think it's just a case of like, generally speaking, the people that need a bit more help in the studio, a bit more guidance, are those that either haven't had much experience recording, so they haven't had much chance to hear back how they sound under like the microscope of a studio recording, and those that haven't really kind of given themselves enough time to practice and do some disciplined practice before coming to the studio. Well, so they'll generally need a bit more work with editing and so on.
Well, speaking of that, you mastered a buddy of ours albums. A guy that we know not super well, but we know him decently from the community. Consecration.
Yeah.
Liam, do you want to tell any naughty stories about Liam? Was he very bad in the studio?
I mean, I don't know the band that well. I only did the mastering process for them. So I did that on my own in the studio. They didn't come to the studio for that.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Man,
I have met him a couple of times because we played a couple of shows with them. We played a show with them.
Oh, really?
Yeah, we played in.
Well, that's right. You did. That's right.
Yeah, in Birmingham about 10 years ago.
Yeah.
And then last year we played in London with them as well.
Great dude. Seems like
a really good band as well.
I was hoping I'd hear like hookers and blows stories and all kind of crazy stuff like that. Almost done here. Really, you got any favorite pieces of gear that you love in the studio that you just have to have?
Yeah, there are a few pieces of gear which I really like. That I would hate to lose. Like I have a Thermonic Culture Phoenix mastering compressor. I really enjoy that. Really like it's very quick to set up and get a good tone with on the recordings, on the masters as well. And I like my Tube Tech stuff and Millennia and Neve as well. I like the Neve gear.
Oh yeah. How old's your desk?
The desks are from the early 80s. They're old broadcast desks. Actually, I've got two that are chained together.
Do they are they very labor intensive to keep performing right? Because I've heard they're the best, but that you're always bringing a guy in to rewire and that kind of stuff.
They're pretty reliable, actually. Right? I mean, they do need calibration quite regularly. I get them calibrated about once a year. But generally, in terms of like, I mean, most analog gear, it tends to stay working pretty well as long as you're using it regularly. It's when they're not used often that they start to get like dusty pots and crackles and stuff.
All right, I have one last comment to make here. Dude, you do realize a Parker Fly is not very metal. You know that, right?
No, I know that, yeah. Neither is wearing a headset when you.
You stole it right out of my mouth. I was gonna be like, the chicks do not dig a dude wearing a headset either.
No, but I don't do it for the chicks.
Of course, there's probably rarely ever any chicks at your gigs, I'm guessing. So that's a joke. It's a joke. Well, look, you got anything, Rick? Oh, this guy here. Real quick, where'd it go? I cannot read that. Can you read that, Rick? I cannot read it. Where the hell did the comment go?
This comment right here. Besides the well-deserved praise.
Yeah, there you go. Go ahead.
Yeah, beside the well-deserved praise for Esoteric, Greg also killed it as composer for the game soundtrack Call of Cthulhu, Dark Corners of the Earth. That was back in 2006.
Yeah.
I don't know that one. Talk a little bit about that quick, Greg, and we'll get you out of here.
Yeah, sure. Basically the people that owned the studio before I did, they also had a software development company, and they used to do voiceover. Well, they used to develop computer games basically. So they did like Simon the Sorcerer, adventure games, and they also did the Call of Cthulhu. And because I was the like mostly working here and running the studio for them. I did a lot of the voiceover work for the games. I did all of the sound design as well for the Call of Cthulhu, all of the sound effects and animation, all of the audio and animations, post production for the voiceovers. Most of the voiceovers were actually recorded in the US for that game, but the music I did for the game as well. But I think I was just in the right place at the right time. Really, it's not like I'd really done any other game work for other companies.
I always wonder how prevalent of that kind of work is for, because Jeff interviewed a guy who did work for Sega, and I know like Steve Wilson did something for a video game, and now I'm kind of got the ball rolling, thinking about like how often does this occur with you guys? It's
not that often. I mean, Johnny was a unique case. Johnny Jueli, I don't know if you know him, Greg, if you ever heard of him. He's a singer for Axel Rudy Pell. I don't know if you know him, German, Richie Blackmore sort of dude. Good stuff. I mean, it's very Dio-esque, and Johnny has a killer voice. He played, his original band was Hard. I went to high school with him, and we reconnected like 2 weeks ago for the first time in 35 years. And but what happened there was he got hooked up with the Japanese composer that wanted him to sing on his music that Sega then co-opted for the Sonic the Hedgehog thing. And it just blew up. There's lots of good money there. And so Johnny does the theme song and stuff like that. It wasn't like they sought him out. He just happened to, they had the Japanese guy that was just, I can't pronounce his name, Senjui or whatever. And he loved Johnny singing at Hardline. He's like, hey, would you want to work on a track? I mean, that's just kind of how it works sometimes, Do you do any of that kind of stuff, Greg? Like somebody contacts you and says, hey, I want you to do a vocal, or, have you done
I do guest performances sometimes, like for bands that I know, musicians that I know. In recent times, I did a guest vocal for the new Ahab album.
Oh, right.
One of the songs, and also a band called Die Listless Heart, UK doom band. I did some of the production for that album as well last year. That's come out on Hammerheart Records now.
Do you have any sort of I guess you could say what you might be most proud of as far as what you worked on 2022?
In terms of albums, I'd say one of the, well, it was a highlight for me to do the guest vocals for the Ahab album, because they're a band I really like, and they're really good friends of ours as well. They're really good guys. Like we toured with them first in 2012, and it was just an incredible tour. Everything was really cool. The guys were really cool, and I'd say Lie Listless Heart as well was really good. Really enjoyed working on that. I really enjoyed the Crix Core EP as well, working with Crix Core. Steve Penny is a really good musician, very interesting songwriter, very dark, but quite unique as well. I really enjoyed that. I mean, I'm lucky really, because I've over the last year, over the last many years really, I've been lucky enough to work with a lot of albums I've really enjoyed. So
considering how strong that Die Listless Heart was out the gate, I kind of saw that as being already a modern classic, like the way that first Ahab was, just kind of the impact that it had. That's the way I kind of knew you were going to go that direction.
Well, Simon, he's got a great melodic voice, which is quite rare in metal, especially. Like, there's not been too many kind of doom bands coming out in recent years with a very good, strong melodic voice, and he's got it. And I mean, he's I don't know if you know much about his history, but he's also been in Seventh Angel and other bands. He's been around for a long time.
Yep.
Cool. All right, Rick, you got one last one in you, and that's it. I got to get him out of here.
I'll leave it for the second half. I know
for the second half. All right.
I can't get into that because
you don't have anything you want to show off, like some cool shit that you got that you wanted to show, Greg. I mean, you came with all your props right away, so
not necessarily, but I brought out that tribunal because it was like it's the new thing right now. I'm kind of excited about it.
I'll check it out.
And they're from Canada. They're just trying to, and they do a really good job. Kind of nailing that English sound. You know,
nice.
that's where it's all happening.
All right. Cool. Well, here's the deal, Greg.
Yeah.
Thank you so very much for 20 minutes. And I'm going to try diligently to keep you under 2 hours in part 2. We're going to do part 2 Thursday?
Yeah, Thursday should be fine for me.
Think you're good with that? Okay.
Yeah,
same time?
Yeah.
Same time? Okay.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll have Rick on. I mean, he does work a real job, unlike me. But we'll see how that goes. I just wanted to finish with one last comment here. CJ, a buddy of ours, in some really good bands, by the way. Moon, Canis Dearest, and is that it? Is there another one? I forget. Anyways,
he does some guest stuff.
He does guest stuff too. Great drummer. Great young drummer.
Yep.
CJ says that Greg guy looks a lot like the dude from Esoteric. But here's the weird thing, CJ. That Greg guy in the corner there, I've been wondering all stream if it's really Greg, and here's why. When we put the artwork together for this thumbnail, okay, it doesn't look, they look alike, but they're not the same guy. And I'm wondering if this Greg is the real Greg. I need to see some identification, sir. That's a funny story. You'd have to see what happened. But my buddy Serge pulled the wrong picture of a guy that comes up when we put your name in for Google. Whoever that dude is, it's a singer. And he sent it to me. I'm like, oh, that's a badass. Oh, wait a minute. I don't think that's him because I don't think he has any art on his guy had sleeve, like tats. And I'm like, I don't think Greg has any tats that I'm aware of.
I do. Yeah.
And I'm like, oh shit. And I had already sent it to you when I was looking at it. Like I sent it all excited, like check it out. It's going to look really cool.
Okay. That leads to a question. Do you get recognized often on the street at all? Like
no.
I figured it's probably, that's a good thing. Right?
Yeah. I mean, I'm a fairly introverted character anyway, so it's not like I really spend a lot of time out. I spend time outside, but not in kind of like busy public places. So.
Well, I'm still not sure you're really Greg Chandler, so I'm going to do some digging on that.
You're the best
Dude, I thank you so much, man. This has been fucking awesome.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your support.
Part 2 is going to be pretty intense, dude. So strap in and get ready because I got there's some really amazing albums coming up here. And that, we're not stroking you. I would tell you if something sucked. I already said a couple songs I didn't like.
Yeah.
I'm not shy of putting my opinion out there, but you're you're an incredible musician and your band is amazing and
thank you, man.
Kind of genre defining. So, we're going to get into part 2 Thursday night at 4:00, guys. Come back and get part 2 with Greg Chandler. We think it's Greg Chandler. So.
Well, I know Jeffy doesn't give 10s. Metamorphogenesis is a 10 for me. So that's my 10 outlet.
9.75 just because I'm going to be that prick. Okay. And I got to say something before we leave. One last thing. Greg, I don't think you said the F word one time in this stream.
No, that's unusual.
That's very mind-blowing, man. If you did, I'll have to watch it back. But I just want you to know that I probably said it enough for all of us. So it's, it's one of those things. It'll never go away. That's why I'll never be a real journalist. So, but man, I put a lot of effort into this, and part 2 is going to be just as good. Yeah. We're going to knock it out of the park. And thank you for being here today. And everybody in the chat says thank you. At one point we had 14 people, so that's pretty cool at this time of the day. And I think this will populate out and do well. So
thank you very much.
Oh yeah,
I really appreciate it.
Thanks for coming on. Nice meeting
you guys.
All right, man. We'll see you, Greg. Thank you so much.
Very much. Take care.
Bye.
Speak to you soon.
Yep. All right, dude. There you go. That was pretty cool.
That was good, man. So part 2 coming up, I guess next couple days or something like that.
Thursday afternoon, rather, we'll do it, which is cool. I'm still trying to figure out what's going on with Ivar. I sent him a message and I haven't heard anything. So I know he's got a lot going on with the release of the album. Just 4 weeks, 4.5 weeks
after March. It's going to be probably almost.
Well, yeah, and I'm sure they're rehearsing. So I'm hoping we can get that in before long, man. Because otherwise, I'm gonna have. Like you said, when March starts, he's out on the road, and I won't be able to get him.
Maybe there's some stuff they need to unveil, and you're so good at getting secrets out of people. He's not ready to do it yet. It's just like the kryptonite.
Did you watch any of that yet?
Which one?
The Evar?
I didn't finish it. I started watching some of it, but I didn't finish it. So
dude, there is some fucking...
I'm behind on some stuff, man. It's just so dude, you're like...
I know.
What do you got? What do you got? Queen coming up?
Well, I got the Queen thing on Wednesday night, which I hate to bug you, but the sooner the better on that. So I can get it to Tom to post because he has a wider reach. I got Queen. My daughter and I were going to do Bowie tomorrow night, but we've decided not to do that at this point.
That's a dense one, man. That's definitely...
what's that?
It's not going to be a two-parter? The Bowie. It's going to have to. Three. Yeah. That's it.
Yeah, my daughter got this really, really great job she really loves. And they almost immediately, within inside 2 months, wanted to make her the director of the area program. And she's like, I don't know if I'm ready for that. Big, instead of making $30 an hour or whatever she's making, they were going to bump her way up to like a salary position. She's like, I just don't know that I'm ready to handle that kind of responsibility yet. And so she's been kind of not stressed, but just pretty beat. Oh, sorry, CJ, I didn't see that, man. Well, you have to watch the whole thing there and check that out. We're gonna end here in a second. Rick and I are gonna go private, but real quick to answer this, I'm not sure. That got a little strange a couple days ago, and I'm not sure what's going on there. What I can tell you is that I have a Queen deep dive coming up on Wednesday. I have Greg on Thursday. Very good chance on Friday that Dennis and I do the third installment of our 80s, 90s overlooked, what do I call it? Overlooked gems or overlooked... I don't even know what the fuck I call the series.
Yeah, overlooked albums of the 80s.
Man, we're doing... Shit, what are we doing here? We're doing Keel, Savage Grace from Dennis's choices, and mine are the 3 Badlands albums and the 4 Crimson Glory albums. Not that they're overlooked, but we wanted to get into those. So that's going to be that's probably going to be a 4-hour show, I would think. And then the next week after that, I don't have firm dates, but the week of the 13th, very, very, very good chance that I'm going to be interviewing Max Phelps from Exist, Cynic, and Death to All. That's going to be a really cool one. And I shouldn't announce it yet, but I'm going to say a little something. There's a very good chance during that week or in and around that week that I'm going to have Tim Boness from No Man, Samuel Smiles, Memory of Machines. That's more of a proggy, artsy sort of interview. And that's I'm really looking forward to that. What else do I have in the fire? I have a couple other things in the fire, a couple of pretty big names that I'm trying to rope in. But the thing with Kelly, I'm not sure what's going on there. I really don't know yet. We're going to work on that and see where that goes. I think that's it. Is that it, Rick? Is that all I talked about recently?
Far as I know, yeah.
No, somewhere in there, Logan and I are going to do Yob.
Oh, okay.
Somewhere. I'm not sure when, where, and how, but all right, we're going to call it. Rick, stick around for a few minutes.
Yep.
We're going to call it here, and thanks for everyone that popped in and checked out part 1 of Greg's interview, which went really swimmingly well, really, really well. Great dude. And that's where we're at. And so we'll see you Thursday, most of you, or Wednesday if you come watch my Queen deep dive, which I forgot to mention, is featuring Tom Draper from Spirit Adrift. He's joining me again. We did a Killer Steely Dan one back before Christmas, and I tied him up, and he's in my closet here. And I said, I'm not going to let you out until you do another deep dive with me. So we're doing that. And the other thing I'm working on trying to get down is never. And you know that, dude. Come on now. I wouldn't fucking, you could say,
let's find out.
Yeah, let's find out. Never. You could honestly offer me $100,000 and I probably wouldn't interview that dude. So Although I could really use $100,000. So if you guys can get the GoFundMe together, I might change my mind. But yeah, so Tom Draper's joining me for Queen on Wednesday night at 10 p.m. Eastern, 7 p.m. Pacific time. Rick, hang on. See you guys. Thank you.
Later.